everyone. We received legal advice regarding various government operations.
Mayor, you seem to be freezing up. Are other people experiencing that?
Yes.
Yes, it seems frozen.
She better hurry up. I'm getting impatient.
All right, now can you hear me? Okay. Councilmember Siemens, did you take over or no?
I threatened to.
All right, apologies. I had about like 3 different Zoom tabs open somehow. I must not have exited out of everything from before. So let's start again. Welcome back, everyone. For our agenda this evening, Councilman Kostick has requested that we pull out of our consent agenda the single reading ordinance authorizing purchase of 4 replacement police vehicles to discuss. So we will have that as a standalone voting item. Other than that, there are no other changes to our agenda this evening. Moving forward, our agenda items on Friday evening at 7:30. The City Council is in an administrative functions session with the city manager search consultant. That the administrative function sessions are closed to the public, and that will be tomorrow evening. And then we'll be back here on January 27th. At 7:30, we have 2 proclamations, one recognizing the Shepherds of Zion Ministries International Church and the U.S. Veteran Reserve Corps recognition of the work that they've been doing, providing food at Tacoma Park Elementary School every other Saturday. If you want to volunteer, they're doing it again this Saturday. Let me know. And the other one will be a Holocaust Remembrance Day proclamation. We'll have our legislative update, and then we'll move into a voting session in which we will vote on the second reading ordinance, code amendment to the police employees retirement plan, and a first reading ordinance approving the FY21 budget amendment 3. Our work session that is scheduled is a report out on our priorities retreat that we just held this past Saturday. Then on Wednesday, February 3rd, we will meet again at 7:30. Again, we'll start with a legislative update. We will have our voting session, which will be the second reading ordinance.
You're having problems, Mayor.
We can't hear you, Mayor. We can't hear you.
3. Our work center master plan process and memorandum of agreement with my is. Am I back?
Off and on.
All right.
Somebody
I am
steal-
going to, maybe I could, let me see if I can fix this. And I'm going to turn it over to Council Member Siemens. Let's see, we have the legislative update.
Yes, so who's giving the legislative update?
Actually, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Ann Seacott is on tonight.
Ms. Ludlow, I did not, I sent her an invitation. I didn't specifically hear from her and haven't spoken to her.
Okay, so clearly there's been a
Right
tough
now?
time there. I know there were hearings today.
Yeah. Okay.
And Ms. Searcy
Um,
can speak to that.
Okay, if the mayor's not back, then we'll move on to the presentation from the Board of Elections. And who is going to introduce that one? Jesse?
So, so I'm happy to introduce tonight Brian Ernst, the chair of the Board of Elections. And he has a presentation of the report for you, and then we'll be happy to entertain your questions.
Yes, thank you. I do have a presentation. As long as our technical challenges don't persist, right? So let's see if I can do that. And as long as people can see my screen, I saw a thumbs up, so that's great. Well, thank you for allowing us to present our report on the 2020 city election. I am Brian Ernst. I'm the chair of the Board of Elections.
You have copies.
And I know I'm joined by some other members of the Board of Elections as well tonight, although I'll be doing the majority of the speaking. I hope if they have any additions, they'll be willing to jump in. So this, I think, before we start, this was really a unique election in many ways. We had already known that this would be the first election where we would be synchronized with the state and federal elections. And so that was already going to be a big change for the city and the board. But we then added the pandemic and the change to a vote by mail election. So we had a lot of firsts in 2020 for Tacoma Park. Before I go further, I really wanted to start with just recognizing all the people that contributed to this election. There was, of course, the Board of Elections members themselves, but also the city clerk's office spent a lot of time on this, including the 2 interns that we had who were fantastic. And then we had election workers who were helping us throughout the process. And then we also had a number of city departments that contributed. And I've listed all the ones that I interacted with, but I'm sure that there were more behind the scenes that were also doing work for these elections. So I think you can just see that there was a lot of effort and different people that were involved in making this election happen. So I want to cover three real key areas here during this presentation. The first is going to be turnout, and then I'll move to the vote by mail process, and then finally some challenges and lessons learned. Before I start on the turnout piece, I have some different data points here in this presentation. I do want to recognize the overall national environment as I talk through this. So this particular election cycle, there was a lot of scrutiny and discussion about election administration in the country. And while that was mostly for the state, state elections, presidential elections, I think the integrity of the process is important, and that's something that the board and all of the workers were really cognizant of as we went through this. And despite that, even though we had as much transparency as we could, there's always going to be some small discrepancies. And I think, you know, a sharp observer of our report and some of the numbers might notice that, you know, there's things that don't match quite exactly from one place to another. And that's just human error. There's lots of people involved, as you saw on the previous slide. And sometimes, you know, we have a person that went through the check-in process, but you know, they didn't get that last button pressed to say that they actually had voted, or you know, a ballot that somebody got but then didn't drop it in the box. So they checked in, but we didn't get a ballot, and they create single-digit differences in some of our numbers. And you know, we're not trying to hide anything, and I don't think it's any nefarious activity, but these small things do happen in our elections. So with that sort of preface, then I'll move to turnout, because I think it is the biggest story we have to tell here. In 2020, turnout rose sharply compared to previous elections in Tacoma Park. I think, you know, this chart really shows that. We, at least since 1993, I think the last 14 elections, we have not had turnout nearly this high in any Tacoma Park election. You know, those early 93, 95 higher turnouts, I think, were because there was the boundary question on the ballot and merging into Prince George's to Montgomery County. And I'd like to say that I could draw a clear correlation or a clear reason why the turnout for 2020 was much higher. Unfortunately, we had so many new things this cycle that it's not entirely certain what the reason is. Was it vote by mail? Was it the synchronization with state and federal elections? You know, was it that there was some contested races on the balance? Was the city communications just much better than before? All of these things were probably part of the reason. Unfortunately, we can't say for sure why. I think the boring answer is it's all of them contributed to the high turnout for this election. I did in the written report provide additional turnout information. Some of these tables were in the report text, and then more were provided at the end in Annex C. I think you know, the board spent a lot of time looking at how we could portray turnout. I think it's important to, you know, just draw your attention to some of these and provide some caveats, particularly table 2 here on residence type. You know, this, it's not a precise measure. This was the best we could do. It was using the address information for voters and seeing if they had a unit number associated with that address. And that's how we were able to pull the distinction. But that's obviously not a perfect way to say if somebody's in multifamily or single family homes, but it's the best we could do. I think it's a reasonable approximation for that particular measure. And I think you can, you know, look at some of the other trends, certainly ask questions if you would like, but you know, peruse the end of Annex C as well when you are able to, and see some of the other charts we have about different ward level turnout figures. Then we can move to vote by mail and some of the key findings for vote by mail. So the vote by mail process was very new for us. It was something that we didn't have a lot of time to prepare for. I think the key points I wanted to make here were that we did a lot of communication around this change. The city communications office really was essential in designing and sending out postcards, mailers, posting on social media, telling residents about the new process for this election. And so we did communicate to voters as much as possible about the vote by mail. With all that going forward, we then still ended up with some delays when ballots were mailed out, which created some challenges for residents when they were expecting to be getting a ballot and then they were not. And there's a chart on the next slide that will go into that more. One thing to note, and it's also in our challenges I think, is the voter register is a challenge that we didn't really anticipate when we were synchronizing, is that, we get it from the county, from Montgomery County. In a presidential year or a midterm year, there's a lot more people registering to vote as the election gets closer. And so we're reliant on getting updates from the county for those people who are registering through them, and then we get it from them. And so while we sent out our first batch of ballots to everyone, we then realized, a few days later, the county sent an update with hundreds of more voters who have been added to the rolls since we sent out that first batch of ballots. And so that's something we'll have to keep in mind if we were to keep going with vote by mail in the future, is that delay that we might get new registrants who are registering with the county. Another vote by mail, especially from the voters' perspective, is the rejected ballots. So we have a requirement that voters have to sign the oath on the envelope in order for their ballot to be counted. That was the main reason that we had ballots that were not counted or that were rejected, is people did not sign the oath. You could cure your ballot, as they say. So people were able to come into the community center and cure their ballots. I don't have an exact number of what those were, but it was probably, I think, maybe 30 to 50 people that if Matt Ling's on, he might have a better estimate for later, but we have a fair amount of people that came in and cured their ballots, but not everyone. And so about 1.5% of ballots were rejected because they didn't have an oath or a signature on the oath envelope. And so that's something to also think about more if we are to be doing more vote by mail. And then finally, I think one real success, or another success, is that the reason we moved to vote by mail was to reduce in-person voting on election day. And in that, we were very pleased to see that not that many people showed up on election day. Not usually what we want to happen, but usually we have over 1,000 voters that come in on election day, and we had 149 in-person voters this election because most people used vote by mail instead. And that was great from a sort of a health and safety perspective, I would say. So then the chart I had just mentioned earlier, the delivery dates for mail, thankfully we have this information because of barcodes on the envelopes that say when they go out through the process in the Postal Service. So 90% or so of the mail that was sent October 15th made it in 2 business days to voters, which sounds great. And it is great. But then you see this long tail of people who are still waiting for ballots. Some of them, it's a couple days, like that's fine. Within a week, I think we thought most people will get their ballots. But there's people, almost 2 weeks later, still waiting on ballots. And not just a few, but a couple hundred people, which is not insignificant. And so that was a challenge. We did provide options for redress. There was the table at the community center every day during the vote by mail period, where people could come and get new ballots if they had not received theirs. And we were able to provide people an option if they were worried that they weren't going to get it, they could come and get a ballot from the community center. But then finally, I wanted to discuss briefly our challenges and lessons learned. As I think we had, the 2 main new items here, which was vote by mail and synchronization. I think the board is really still talking through some of these, but at least initial thoughts from us were that vote by mail was actually, I think, more labor intensive than we had anticipated. There's a lot more work than we had ever really thought it could be. I think we made it through this year, but it's something we'd have to consider going forward of how we would address that. And then also, something we did know is that vote by mail is fairly costly. All the mail does add up over time when you're sending 10,000, 11,000 mailings out. And I mean, we really benefited from people using the drop boxes. That saved the city a lot of postage money. Honestly, it was we got a lot of our ballots back in the drop boxes. The rejected ballot increases that I mentioned earlier, that's an area that I think was one of concern. How do we keep those rejected ballots down? We don't want to reject ballots as much as possible. So that's something to consider. And then how can we, review our equipment and staffing requirements in the future if it was to be vote by mail? We had already secured some vendors for this that maybe weren't the precise right ones if you're going to be doing vote by mail, because we had been talking to them before we were doing this style of election. So can we adapt and make some different decisions that would improve the process for us? And then when it comes to synchronization, the real feedback that we got was that there was some confusion about the polling places. So I think there's more than just Tacoma Park there, because the county polling places were all different this cycle than they were before as well. People were going, I think, to Piney Branch or to Tacoma Elementary, and they were thinking that their polling place was there. They didn't see it, and they came to the community center because they saw the flags and were hoping to vote in the presidential. We turned a lot of people away who were pulling in and they wanted to be voting for the president, and so they then left to go to the Silver Spring Civic Center. And then finally, as I'd also mentioned, the voter register and how we can keep that updated in a more timely way, especially for vote by mail, but even before then, so that we are picking up people that are registering through the county as we go through the election. Those were really the main points. I was trying to keep this relatively brief. I wanted to make sure that any other Board of Elections members that were interested and had additional comments had an opportunity. So if there's anybody else that wanted to add, please do. And then if not, I'll turn it back to council for any additional comments or questions. Thank you.
Any other Board of Elections members would like to speak?
I think I might be the only other one here, but I don't have anything else to add to that. Thanks.
Great.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Well, Brian, thank you. And hopefully I'm back now. I turned my computer off. I turned it back on. I think it just needed a rest, like we probably all do every now and then. But I will say thank you very much for sending the report ahead of time, because I was able to read it yesterday. So I thank you very much for that. And just a huge thanks to the whole Board of Elections, like we've mentioned before. I mean, just an incredible job. Really appreciate it. So I'll open it up now to my colleagues. I see Councilman Kostick has her hand up.
Thank you very much. This is a really informative report, and really appreciate all of the work that you all did, both in the election and since the election, to help us kind of take a look back at what happened. I mean, overall, I think it was really, really positive that we had such an increase in turnout. And I know obviously it was a big challenge to shift to the synchronized election and also the mail-in at the same time. So I think for me, the big question is kind of looking ahead to 2022, what are your recommendations and what are you thinking in terms of things that worked and what we should look at for that election? I think the mail-in was really great and convenient in many, many ways. But as you noted too, there were people who wanted to vote in person who were confused by there not being the site not being the same location as the location for the national election. And so is there any chance for us, I imagine it would just be a huge undertaking to have locations at the multiple voting sites in 2022 and also to do the mail-in. So what are you kind of recommending us look at?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I will say I think we've mostly been looking I was looking backward at how the 2020 election went, and we're just starting that forward thinking on 2022. And um, I think it would be useful perhaps to have a 2022 discussion when we've developed more concrete recommendations in a few months. I do think that what you raised about the polling site issue and whether we could do vote by mail and be staffing all the different polling places that the county is at would be a real challenge. I'm not sure we could do both at the same time.
And I know you also raised the point about needing to recruit more election workers overall, regardless of trying to staff multiple polling locations. Are there things that you think we could do to help recruit more people? Do you think that the challenge this year was due to the pandemic, or is it something you think we'd face in 2022 as well?
I think the pandemic's contributed to that. I think we were fortunate because I think the county was recruiting, they were still recruiting for people to be counting ballots, but by reducing polling places, they didn't have as many in-person people on election day, which was helpful for us. But I think we'll still face that challenge in 2022.
Thank you. And then just one other question. Do you think there is any capacity to do some level of outreach to people via email, potentially to distribute ballots or even receive ballots? I don't know if there's any technology that makes that possible.
Yeah, I think, so one service that we did have, but we didn't really want to, it was really just for special circumstances, was the availability of ballots over email and being able to send them back over email. The city clerk can talk more in detail about how that worked, but it was really, we just wanted it for people that maybe they couldn't get a ballot mailed to them in time because they were overseas, as rather than it be a mass use mechanism. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Smith?
Thank you guys for.
Did the clerk want to answer?
I did. I just wanted to
Sorry.
make a quick comment related to that, and that is that Montgomery County does allow that, as you know, and we did have a system that would have enabled it, but it just, we didn't really have a chance to vet it fully with the council and the public generally, and so I had some hesitancy. We did use it in some kind of urgent circumstances for people, but that is certainly something to pursue in the future.
My apologies, Councilmember Smith. You want to go now?
Thank you guys for the report. Did you receive any detailed comments on the ballot itself, the mail-in ballot? Did people find that it was easy to fill out? Were there any issues? Because there were ballots that were rejected. So can you speak on that?
I did not receive any feedback that I know of about the ballot design or the envelope design itself. There were some ballots rejected. However, I think the number of ballots that were rejected because the actual ballot itself was improperly completed were very few. I think single digits. There was a few that couldn't be sent to the scanner, and we had to review to see if we could figure out what the voter intent was. But I think almost all of them, except for a couple, were able to be resolved. And that is similar to previous elections. That said, I think there's always an opportunity to review the design, especially around the signature piece and how we can make sure people don't miss that.
Okay. Would you guys recommend more drop boxes in the city?
I don't know. I I do think, I mean, we were pleased with how much the drop boxes were used. It's a lot about location for the drop boxes and whether we can have a secure location. I think we can look into whether there's other places that might work. But at least for now, I mean, and now we have two, so we know we can use two again, but something to look into for the future.
And then finally, you said that the county gave you another list of voters because it was a new registered voter list. Was that list sent out to the candidates, or were candidates made aware of that list?
I don't know. That's a good question. The city clerk might be able to answer that better than I.
Hi, it was I believe that anyone who requested it after the list after we received it would have received the newer list, but I can't say for sure that, I don't know. The answer is I don't know, and I didn't automatically send out updated information to people who had requested it earlier. So I guess the short answer is no.
Okay, thank you very much.
But I hear what you're asking.
All right, thank you.
Great. Next we have Councilmember Kovar, then Siemens and Searcy.
There we go. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Brian, for the presentation and for the report. I think the staff and the board and the volunteers all did an excellent job on the election. I stopped by a couple of times on election day just to see how things were going, and prior as well to the help desks, and it looked like a lot of great work was being done. So I appreciate that. And the report is very comprehensive, which is great. It's kind of interesting to look through the write-ins, and I couldn't help noticing that one of the people who I suppose ran against me was and got one vote was Donald Trump. So I feel a little bit of kinship with Joe Biden having run against and beaten Trump. Couple of points and then some questions. I guess in a way we didn't really get the full test of how the synchronization worked because we didn't have the two side-by-side polling places that people could go in and then kind of go across the hall and vote on it. So, and because of COVID, we ended up doing what we needed to do with the mail-in ballots. So I do kind of wonder whether it would make the most sense to try it in the next election with the physical polling places so that we really get the test for that. And I think we might know more about that when we eventually get the data from the county on what the turnout was like from our area in the presidential election, because we don't know. I think you mentioned, and I think it said it in the report, that some number of people showed up on election day thinking they would vote for the presidential and the other elections there and then left. We don't know how many that was, but we also don't know how many people just skipped out on the local elections entirely who might have voted in both if they had an easier chance at it. So one of the things I'm wondering about is whether, and Brian, maybe it's too soon for you to say it, but maybe my colleague already asked a version of this, but setting aside the cost and the personnel, just in terms of the actual process, do you think you could say if it's better to do in-person versus mail-in or some sort of hybrid, if you could set aside the cost and the staffing question?
Yeah, I just don't think we can say anything for certain right now. I think the only consideration that we have discussed is, while it is consistency essentially, like, would it be challenging for voters to be switching from different types of voting processes from election to election, or whether it'd be good to have consistency. And I think that's just one of many considerations. But yeah, we just really haven't gotten to that point where I think we could say for sure.
But in terms of the people not understanding it, I mean, I think we all thought when we tried to publicize how the election was going to unfold over the course of September and October, no matter how many times we said there's two separate elections, there'll be two separate drop boxes, at least at one location, but if you want to vote in person, you'll have to go somewhere else. We all kind of knew that it's hard for the message to filter through, but I mean, do you have a sense, were there huge numbers of people who didn't understand that and who showed up expecting to vote, or was that just a small number, or is it hard to quantify? I mean, I understand at that point, you're not going to ask who they were and record how many there were, but do you have a sense for how many people ended up showing up and then having to leave?
I mean, I don't have, I mean, anything to go by except just sort of what I observed, you know, throughout the day from some cars going in and then leaving. And it was probably, I don't know, 100, 200 people that came in and left. I don't want to give any concrete numbers. I mean, we know close to, you know, the drop off from the presidential to the Tacoma Park election. We don't have the exact numbers because we're waiting to get that from the county so we can cross-reference. But I think Arthur David Olson, who was formerly on the board, was now from the county. And I think he's, you know, one precinct has Tacoma Park voters and non-Tacoma Park voters, so we don't know exact.
I think we might be losing you
I think
again, Brian. Let me just ask you a couple other quick things and I'll defer to my colleagues.
Still here.
Can you explain about the inactive voters? And I don't know, maybe that's Jesse Carpenter instead. You mentioned if people haven't voted for a while, then they are not removed, but they didn't automatically get the ballot in the mail. Can you explain about that?
Brian looks like he's having issues, but I can answer that really quickly.
Okay.
Inactive status is something that Montgomery County Board of Elections applies to voters. It's not something that Tacoma Park applies to them. So when we receive the voter file from them, voters will come up either as inactive or active, and they're inactive for the reasons that you said. For those voters, we just didn't send them a ballot.
But if they had showed up or requested a ballot, they would have been able to vote, right?
I think we probably would have sent them to Jesse just to confirm, but they
Okay.
probably would have, yeah,
To determine if they still lived in the city or whatever it might be, right?
exactly, yeah.
So just two other points or questions. One is, I think in the report it says because of the delay and looked like several hundred of the ballots when they were mailed out getting to people as early as we had hoped, even though the vast majority did, that it might make sense to mail, if we do that in the future, to mail them out earlier, is what you said. And so I guess the only question I have about that is, you know, if people get them a month in advance, do they just vote then and kind of miss a whole flow and discussion and debate about the election? I mean, is there a concern that, you know, there's people worried about the Postal Service? They want, a lot of people I know, the day they got their ballot, they hustled over there and dropped it in the box or mailed it right off. Is there a danger, and maybe other places that have done this for decades know the answer, but is there a danger that people just miss kind of the most intense focus phase of the election by doing that and might have ended up voting for different people? Is that a concern? Is it unquantifiable?
That was certainly a concern, and there's just sort of a balancing between that and making sure that the ballots were received and people would have time to send them back. I think this election, our greatest concern was that there would be some unforeseen issue, and so we did want to get them out. This being the first time we've done an election, I think going forward, that's certainly something we could discuss. I think that's a reasonable point that you raise.
And then on the observation of the counting process, I don't know, you could kind of watch you guys walking around there doing stuff. You couldn't tell what was happening. You couldn't tell how many votes were being counted. And I know it's not possible to do what was done in past years when, at least with COVID, when people were gathering in listening to each, ballot being called up as it was counted or however it was being done. And hopefully this won't come up again, but how much thought and consideration and what kind of ideas did you have in thinking about what you were going to do to make the tabulation process visible? I mean, it was technically visible. It could be observed. I'm not sure anybody could really tell what was going on.
Looks like Brian is back. Did you want to answer that? Or do you want me to tackle it, Brian?
Well, before you answer, I'll actually just say this is one of the points when I think it was the election day and the election day afterwards, when City TV did interviews with you all and you said, this is now what we're doing. I would recommend moving forward, if there could be something like that interspersed more, depending on how things went, because I thought that was super helpful. To just have City TV, like, I think, interview someone, I think it was mostly Brian, you, and just kind of like describe, okay, here's the process. This is what we're doing right now, or this is what we're going to be doing the rest of today. Was really helpful.
I think Arthur David was actually doing a little bit of that, but it was never clear to us when we were out there how much it was being broadcast audio wise. But that's certainly a good idea going forward, to have something of a script to maybe read between the different steps. Part of the difficulty is that there's just many different things all happening at once. And one day we're doing canvassing, one day we're doing intake, one day we're doing tabulation, and some days we'll only do intake. So we were sort of just trying to make sure the work got done. But hopefully, maybe we could work with City TV to have a prompt that maybe has a short paragraph to explain. Maybe that would be useful.
Yeah, you could even run a crawl across the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
If it's any one of 6 activities that are happy, and say the staff is now doing this, or not the staff, the board, or whatever. But anyway, I appreciate that, Mayor, and I will stop there.
Those are good ideas.
Cool. All right, I have Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Ernst, and thank you to the Board of Elections and all the volunteers. You guys did a great job this year. I was very, very impressed with how the election went and seemed to be so smooth. Again, who knows what's happening behind the black box there, that I know there's a lot of work put in, and doesn't feel as smooth when you're putting in the long hours, but it just, it worked. I didn't really have any complaints from voters, and it was remarkable. And I really thank you, given the challenges that we faced this year, that you guys did such a great job. I also want to thank you for the detailed report you presented tonight. It's interesting to look at that. I want to look at it some more. I was disappointed to see Ward 4 had the lowest percentage turnout this year. I'm interested to look at that with some of the other numbers too, because I thought that that we actually had more people turn out than some of the other wards, but maybe because redistricting is here upon us, there's an explanation for that. Anyways, thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Councilman Searcy.
Great. So I just want to echo Councilmember Siemens and my appreciation of all of the work that you all did in such a short amount of time. I'm still in awe at how quickly you all were able to pivot and move to vote by mail. So it's really, really, really great job that you all did, and amount of effort that you put forward, I think was amazing. One question I have, especially if our next election, we want to continue down the vein of vote by mail, is how we might be able to do more outreach to multifamily buildings to get them registered for city elections in enough time to enable them to obtain ballots by mail. I know that, for some of the larger multifamily buildings, whereas when we were voting in person and there was lots of voting in person, you kind of like flag someone off the street and just say, hey, did you vote? No, go sign up. But with a vote by mail approach, it's not as easy to do that. And so I was just wondering, especially if we don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic and how long we're going to go down, how long we're going to be in this position. Has there been any thoughts about, different approaches to increase voter registration and vote by mail in multifamily buildings, or some lessons learned? I know the pandemic created just some really hard, challenges in terms of trying to get into some of these buildings, but I was just wondering if you all heard anything or have come up with any ideas based on what you've experienced.
It's something that we talk about every election cycle, is how do we reach more people with our message? And we've done a lot of in-person activities before, mostly at different large-scale events, where there's not that many of us to do a lot of coverage different places. But if you have suggestions, really, we're always looking for more ideas. I think the one thing that was good is we were able to send a lot of mail to people, and that is helpful. And I think people get things multiple times in their mailbox. It helps a lot more than having a table at one of the festivals throughout the year, potentially. So I think that was good. But of course, that means you have to be on the mailing list. And so, we really have to figure out how to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I know during some of the council priority discussions, we've talked about, the mayor brought up and others, this idea of, a community neighborhood ambassador kind of person. And that may also be something that we want to think about, especially as it relates to trying to make connections to some of the multifamily buildings, to make residents aware of, their ability to register to vote and where they could vote and where they, all of that information. Because I will say, during the last election, because there was confusion, it left room for certain candidates to give information in a way that people could argue could be misleading, right? So I just want to make sure that, that residents see the city as the source of information about how to register to vote, where to take your ballots, how it all works, and that they're not overly reliant on, any one candidate, me or anyone else, in terms of getting that information to them. So that's just something I do want to make sure that we kind of think about for the next go round.
Councilmember Kovar, did you have another question, or?
I have one other question, yeah. I don't know whether Councilmember Deval wanted to go first, but I'll just ask, I meant to ask this before, I apologize. We have in the new election ordinance this requirement that outside organizations that are interested in influencing the election, I think is the way we term it, are required to register with the clerk. And I don't think we have to get the answer now if we don't know it, but I'm just interested in whether that happened. I know all the candidates registered, but I wonder whether any of the organizations or individuals who want to do that registered.
No, no one was registered in that capacity.
Okay, but so if there were organizations that were trying to do that, then there's some disconnect, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Councilman Deval, you're next. Oh, and then the city manager had a point.
Very, very quickly, what everybody said about I thought that particularly given the special challenges of this year, that the election went smoothly, the volunteers, the staff, everybody that worked on it, it was as smooth as it could be. I dropped in to the help desk. I dropped in online to the count. I got feedback from residents. And as Councilmember Seaman said, the only complaints I got were about, I think, most of those 276 people who didn't get their ballots quickly must have been in Ward 2. But that's clearly not, something that you all could have controlled ahead of time. Going forward, I really look forward to hearing your recommendations and having a session to discuss them. In terms of additional look at the data. I picked up on the multifamily numbers. Also, I'm curious if there is a similar set of percentages from previous elections. Is this continuing the trend or did it change? Ditto on the 18 to 35. So that seemed to be the low point, age 18 to 35. And I wondered how much of that has to do with updating of the voter lists by the state. And I don't know the process for how they update the voter lists. I would be curious if you all are able to comment on that the next time we talk. And last but not least, some of the other, a separate topic, campaigning before and during the election, and some of the issues that came up then. Maybe in our next session we could hear from the board and or the clerk about such issues as the one that Councilmember Kovar raised, and maybe a couple of others out there in terms of what we ought to be doing different in outreach and communications, whatever in the future. Thank you so much. Awesome job.
City Manager.
Thank you. As one of the persons who was in the building while all this was going on every day, I just want to relate that the staff was awesome. The Board of Elections staff and their assistants were so professional, so dedicated, very serious about how to do the job. And it was particularly complex because of the pandemic. So they had to keep their distances. They were worried about cleanliness, but also particularly in this presidential election, just the overwhelming interest in security of the ballots. Not that we wouldn't be secure in a normal year, but the cameras that were on the ballot boxes, the whole bit that had to be maintained, and the security systems that were involved, it was really a challenge. And one of the things that Brian Ernst didn't mention too much in this presentation, but it's included in the report, is how long it takes to open a mail ballot. And the 5 minutes per 100 just to open the envelopes. It was a real local view about why Pennsylvania took a while or whatever, right? It was one of those things that showed that to do it right, it takes time. And I think that was longer than we all thought it would be. So, I think people were there longer than we thought they would be. Nevertheless, the seriousness and the dedication was awesome. And I think it won't ever be the same, because I don't think we're going to have a situation, hopefully, that we have a pandemic that alters that as it has in this past election. And on the discussion about multifamily buildings, I think there was a real hesitance about people going into multifamily buildings in the same way, given the pandemic as well. So this may just always be an election with an asterisk, but it was really the best of Tacoma Park. I just very honored to have even been able to watch it. Thank you.
Great. And Brian, I just had two things. I don't know, and I apologize that my computer wasn't working before, but I know in the report, and I don't know if you brought it up in your presentation, that that the Board of Elections wanted to look at things like the financial reporting and how frequent that was done. And it sounded like you got a lot of questions about authorization lines and materials and things. And so you don't have to answer this tonight, but I think it would be helpful to have the board come back and provide some recommendations on that. And as you're deliberating, maybe interview some of us who did run regarding that, because I have to say we got to fix the forms for that financial reporting. It was really difficult, and I think the timing of things we should look at again, and how the information can be shared in a timely way to actually meet the intention of the reason we're doing the reports. So again, I think we want to make sure that everyone's being transparent and reporting things, in addition, not setting up barriers for people to actually run for elected office. But I will say, as someone who ran, I found that it was a lot to get that all done and have things in place. And this was my third time running, or like a fourth time running for elected office in the city. And so I could see if somebody, this was their very first time trying to figure everything out and figure out how to do that, it would have been overwhelming. So I hope that the Board of Elections can kind of look at that so we can reduce barriers to encouraging people to run. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. That's actually one thing we talked about in our most recent meeting, was getting more feedback from candidates on how the election went from their perspective, and anything that would be able to be improved from your side. So hopefully we'll be reaching out sometime this year to gather that information.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We made a lot of changes for this election, so there's a lot to go over. And I guess in terms of thinking about, making changes for the next election, perhaps when the Board of Elections has their next meeting, you all can kind of think about like going backwards from the next election, and when you'll need input from the City Council on certain things, so that we make sure that we schedule you all for another report, and then discussion and what we need to do as a council to set up for the next election, because it goes by really fast.
Yeah, we don't have 3 years this time, so it's
No,
short.
we don't. So yeah. Anyway, well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And thanks, Matt.
Mayor, since you mentioned it,
Mhm.
forms, I'm pretty sure another one is due on January 31st. Just mention that to my colleagues to check online.
Okay, it's good to know. Thank you for the reminder. Great. Terrific. Okay, so I shut down everything on my computer. So let's see. Let's go back to the legislative update. I'll just do that quickly before we move to public comments. The session is in full swing. Councilwoman Searcy repped us well, I heard today, talking about Delegate Charkoudian's bill on the planting of trees along the Purple Line route. Thank you very much, Councilwoman Searcy, for putting in that testimony. And next up, Councilwoman Dabala is working on a stormwater bill that will help update the regs to the current models to better take into account climate change. We will, when that testimony is done, we will share that with the rest of council as well. And we are putting all testimony up on the city website. Is that correct? Or we will be?
If we haven't got it up yet, we will do it soon.
We will, yes.
It would be on the city council page under legislation.
Great, so people can see that as well. So there's a lot going on. Appreciate the residents who have sent us notice of bills and other things. We will continue, as I said, Councilmember Kovar, myself and Councilman Dabala meet every Tuesday morning to review and see if there's things we need to bring back to council. So we'll continue to do that.
If I could just ask Councilmember Searcy how the testimony process went today, because I saw emails back and forth and I just wondered if there's something I should know.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I was on for about 2 hours and was not able to speak because Delegate Charkoudian was in another hearing. So, and so I had to log off to attend another call. I got back on and I think I missed her, but I think she acknowledged everyone's testimony because I think a couple of her other speakers were on when I was on, but because she wasn't available, they had to skip her bill.
No.
So yeah, I think I can only assume that my testimony, I have to go back and watch the tape, but I think all of our testimonies were submitted, but they are going really fast. So I will say when they give you your time and you're there, it was almost to the minute that they were calling, at least that particular committee was calling her bill. So she just got hung up with something else, but you know, in any other scenario, if my colleagues are also testifying using the web-based system they have, at least with that committee, they were running pretty on schedule. So
It
It looked like on social media that you had done it and you did a good job. So.
well, I appreciate that. I really tried. I was on that Zoom call. I learned about a lot of stuff. Childcare, traffic calming, you know, drag racing on major highways. I learned about a lot that's going forward. But I think I might have missed that 30 minutes when I had to be on another call. I think I might have missed my turn. I don't know. But no, I appreciate her shout out. And I don't, I'm not sure if they just submitted all of our testimonies in writing, which is possibly what happened, but.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. Okay. Public comments. I saw no public comments on voting items, but we have 2 public commentators on general items. I think Arthur David Olson was up first.
Sure, thank you. I'm Seth Grimes, 7300 Willow Avenue. I'm testifying this evening on behalf of Tacoma for All. I have sent you all by email and to the clerk a copy of our written testimony, which includes details that I won't be giving to you right now. Tacoma for All is an advocacy organization that promotes a sustainable, equitable, transit-oriented community through the creation and preservation of affordable and market rate housing, commercial spaces, and community amenities. We support Montgomery County Councilmember Will Jawanda's proposed zoning text amendment 2007 with amendments that I will describe and for which we ask Tacoma Park City Council support. ZTA 2007 would allow duplexes, townhomes, and apartments, often called missing middle housing, in R60 zones close to certain transit hubs, Montgomery County Metro rail stations. A Montgomery planning report explains that, quote, missing middle housing provides housing options available to a range of incomes for an increasingly diverse population of downsizing seniors, professionals without children, young families, and newcomers to the region. Many Tacoma Park neighborhoods already support a mix of missing middle housing types in the form of houses subdivided into apartments and small-scale apartment buildings, as well as townhouses. Areas include Carroll and Tulip Avenues in Ward 1 and Flower Avenue in Wards 2 and 5, plus Ward 2 and 3 townhouses in areas that were zoned R20 and R30 in the 2014 Montgomery County zoning rewrite, reflecting existing uses. In much of the rest of the city, including in Ward 1 and Ward 3 historic district neighborhoods, you'll find houses that were formerly subdivided into apartments. I'll personally say that both houses across the street from mine used to have 4 apartments. Tacoma Park regrettably lost this naturally occurring affordable housing when these houses were converted to single-family homes. ZTA 2007 would allow much of Tacoma Park to regain its past form by supporting restoration of housing diversity in affected neighborhoods. It would advance the goals of the city's 2019 Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan and our city's commitment to racial equity and economic diversity. Noting these benefits, we urge the Tacoma Park City Council to endorse ZTA 2007 and further to ask that it be amended to cover the entire city of Tacoma Park, just as 2019's ZTA 1901, liberalizing accessory dwelling unit rules, was extended to cover the whole city. Tacoma for All recommends amendments to ZTA 2007 is introduced to include also R40 zones countywide, subject to current limitations, and if not countywide, both R40 and R60 zones in the entire city of Tacoma Park. We also recommend that the County Council modify the ZTA to cover not only radius distances from Metro rail station entrances, but also from Purple Line Station and Bus Rapid Transit stations. Both of those will affect large portions of Tacoma Park. We don't see that the ZTA will encourage tear downs, but we do know others are concerned. Historic district rules that cover neighborhoods including mine and much of Ward 3 as well as Ward 1 limit alterations to covered properties. Existing rules, the ZTA would not override them. Any claim that homes will be torn down is simply false so far as the historic district is concerned. Further, owners have been expanding smaller houses throughout Tacoma Park for decades. There are equity issues when additions are allowed, but multi-unit houses and small apartment buildings are prohibited or segregated into a minority of city neighborhoods. Finally, we would love to see elimination of parking minimums or failing their elimination reductions. However, we'll save that advocacy and discussion of historic district reforms for other occasions. Finally, Tacoma for All urges the Tacoma Park City Council to support ZTA 2007 amended to cover the entire city of Tacoma Park and with other amendments that I've mentioned. Thanks for this opportunity to comment. And of course, I'd welcome fielding your questions now or at any time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your public comments. And as Mr. Grimes mentioned, he did email them to all of us and the city clerk. So now we'll go turn to Arthur David Olson, who is also signed up for public comments this evening. And Jesse's already started your timer.
All right. Arthur David Olson, Herbie Hancock Avenue on elections. First, a reminder, low voter turnout is only a symptom. The underlying problem is lack of civic engagement. By making voting easier in the 2020 election, the city increased voter turnout. The civic engagement problem remains, and indeed, higher voter turnout may serve to mask it. While voter turnout did increase, it was a good deal below the turnout for the county election. This tells me that if the goal is to maximize turnout, mail-in elections are not the answer. It is, rather, to get city contests included on county ballots in unified elections. And since county turnout is far greater in presidential election years than in gubernatorial years, maximizing turnout requires shifting the 4-year city council terms that coincide with presidential terms. Some modest change would be required for unified elections. Candidates would need to be identified earlier to fit in with the county's timetable, and seating of new councils would need to be later, since county certification of elections results takes longer than city certification. One immodest change would be required: abandonment of ranked choice voting. A few years ago, Maryland state law was changed to require counties to let cities put their contests on county ballots. But Tacoma Park's use of ranked choice voting gives Montgomery County an excuse for not doing so. Switching back to traditional voting eliminates that excuse. While one benefit claim for ranked choice voting is saving money by avoiding the cost of runoff elections, it can end up costing our city money if it means we can't piggyback on county elections and thus continue to run our own. And while ranked choice voting is supposed to lead to positive campaigns, some of the city's experience in 2020 shows that this doesn't always happen. While the city would still need to handle city-only voters, that's a lot less work. That and a switch to 4-year rather than 2-year terms, meaning half as many elections, would lead to substantial cost savings. I hope the council will take specific steps to address lack of civic engagement, and that it will direct a shift to unified city and county elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I think those are all the public comments we have this evening. We will now move on to council comments. Councilman DeBala first.
Thank you. Start with a few thank yous. Thank you to all the city police and everybody else who helped to keep us safe and have a peaceful transition of power. That was a lot of behind the scenes work that I think people don't see and may not recognize. I wanted to thank all the residents who participated in some form in the day of service for the Martin Luther King weekend. I kept getting reports all day of little renegade bands of people picking up trash or doing food distribution. One food distribution group had 70 casseroles. That's a 7 followed by an O. Casseroles donated that weekend. So thank you all for keeping the spirit. And a third thank you to all the folks who participated in the climate discussion with the county staff last Thursday night. There were somewhere between 50 and 60 people, plus the folks who were involved in the actual presentations. The other thing I wanted to talk about is regional work. The Chesapeake Bay Program Committee from our Regional Council of Governments met last Friday. The focus was on equity issues and environmental justice. There's a lot of useful materials. I've shared it with some of the city staff already, and anybody on the council who wants to hear more. It was a really, really good meeting, looking at how that works out with respect to water quality and bay issues. And the CPC, the COG Energy Committee, is meeting this next Wednesday to talk about the implementation of the recently adopted regional climate plan. So that's it for me, I think. Thank you very much.
Great. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sad to bring the news tonight that another Ward 4 resident has passed away from the COVID-19 virus. I'm sad to say that Martin Gottschalk, who has lived for many years in Ward 4, I first met him in 2004. He was very active city resident. He lived in the Mapleview Apartments, where he was the chair of the tenant association and was active in helping to encourage the owner of that building to maintain good quality there. He also was local, some of his local issues were transportation for those who did not have vehicles. And he was also a strong political advocate for electricity aggregation. And that continued from the time I first met him in 2004 on through his death. I hope everybody remembers him and joins me in wishing that this virus would come to an end. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Smith.
I want to take the opportunity and highlight a very special person in Ward 5 that recently received a citation from the Maryland General Assembly. The president of the Tenant Association at Essex House reached out to our own delegate, Laura Jacudian, and Jackie Frazier, has been recognized. This recognition is to highlight her dedicated service to her community during the COVID-19 pandemic. It is presented by all members of the delegation. I am just delighted that Ms. Frazier has been recognized. Please, if you have the opportunity, reach out to her. She's been doing yeoman's work for the over 400 residents that live in Essex House and for many residents that reside on Maple Avenue. So Jackie, I want to thank you for everything that you do for our community. We appreciate it. We may not be able to talk to you as much as we want, or can't even see you because of the pandemic, but know that you are on the top of our mind, and we couldn't do it without you. I want to also mention that I reached out to the mayor and the council about presentations by Biblioteca and the vendor of the Ollie autonomous vehicle that I had virtual meetings about last week. Hopefully that will be on a future agenda. And finally, I just ask residents, especially those who live in apartment buildings, please wear a mask. Wear a mask when you're in the common area. Wear a mask when you're in the laundry facility. Wear a mask when you are in an elevator. the numbers of cases that we have in Tacoma Park, those residents who have COVID-19 continue to go up. We have these more contagious variants that are coming into the country. So please, we can't fight this virus unless you help us. Yes, there are vaccines coming online, but that does not mean that you should not wear a mask. So please, I ask everyone to wear a mask as much as you possibly can. It would be great if the council could consider a resolution or something that would recommend to apartment owners and property managers that wearing a mask is a CDC recommendation that they should follow. They should put up signage in their common areas asking their residents to wear masks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilman Costick.
Thank you. I want to reiterate Councilmember Dabala's thanks to city staff and particularly to the police and the police chief for helping ensure safety and helping people feel a little calmer, I think, knowing that there was planning underway during the inauguration and the weeks leading up to it. I know it was a really stressful time for many residents and for staff, and a lot of uncertainty. And I think, I'm very, very pleased with how things went yesterday at the inauguration. And it feels sort of like a new year today to me, much more so than it did a couple of weeks ago. So there's certainly a lot of ongoing work to do. And we know the sentiments that we heard previously and saw at the Capitol riot didn't go away because of the inauguration, but certainly there's a lot to be positive about as we move forward. And I just really want to thank the staff and the police for the efforts and the attention to this issue over the past several weeks in particular. I also want to just also lift up Councilmember Smith's comments about the importance of continuing to protect yourself against COVID-19, masks, and social distancing. I think I've seen a lot of people who are just, feeling tired and the winter blahs, and, we want to be able to see each other and do things, but we're not quite there yet. So please take care and take care of yourselves and your neighbors. We had a TPB meeting today, and I want to give a big shout out to 2 Tacoma Park residents who were appointed to the Community Advisory Committee, which is the TPB's committee to get resident feedback. Both of them are Ward 3 members, although I cannot take credit for recruiting them. And they are Ayal Lee and Tracy Duval. And I'm really excited to have them be members of this committee. In the time that I've served on the Transportation Planning Board, we have not had any representatives from Tacoma Park. So it's very exciting to have 2 of them now. I also want to let people know that I am having a Ward 3 meeting next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And kind of the big focus of that meeting, although we'll have a chance to also just have general discussion and questions if people have them, is that we are having Pastor Mac from Centro Evangelístico attending, and he is going to be talking with us about plans for the former John Nevins Andrews School property, which they purchased a couple of weeks ago, I guess maybe a month or 2 ago now, and he'll be sharing some more information and is really just looking forward to an initial meet and greet with the community. And I think it'll be a great opportunity to learn more about their plans and how we can work together with them. And then finally, I wanted to ask the city manager if there is a way that we could help push out some more information about vaccines and what people can expect. I know that's all coming at the county and state level, but I'm getting a lot of questions and confusion from people about what to do, where to sign up, who can sign up, where to ask questions, all of those things. So if we can help answer some of those questions and get people directed to the right place, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Councilman Searcy.
Hello. So first, I want to echo what a lot of my colleagues have said already. Specifically, my appreciation to all of the city staff that worked during the inauguration, making sure that the city is and our residents are secure. If you are like me, you were trying to figure out whether or not it was thundering or what was happening. And you just didn't, I never would have guessed it was Katy Perry, and I would hear her all the way in my house. But definitely special shout out to the Tacoma Park Police and our emergency preparedness staff that have been working around the clock. We really appreciate all of your hard work. Mayor mentioned submitted testimony on trees along the Purple Line route. There's a couple of other meetings that are forthcoming next week. I believe on the 20, just look this up, on the 30th, the Prince George's County will be hosting another virtual community meeting on the Northern Gateway Wayfinding Signage Plan, and that's the area that's directly across the street from the crossroads. It's basically the Prince George's side of the Tacoma-Langley crossroads area. And so there's lots of work that's happening on the Prince George's side in terms of trying to identify ways to develop wayfinding and things like that. So excited to participate in that meeting. Also want to remind people about the Public Safety Task Force. We are looking for participants. And on Tuesday, January the 26th at 6:30, I will be participating along with our consultants in an information session. So it'll be an opportunity for folks who may be thinking about volunteering to serve on the task force to come and participate in the Zoom meeting and ask any questions that you may have. Also, applications are due by next Friday, January the 29th. So also want to encourage people who are interested in participating to apply. And I think that is all I have room to remember right now, but thank you all so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Sorry, my thing is moving slowly today. Thank you, appreciate it. I did want to say a few words about the inauguration first. So happy, of course, that we've gotten past that. And just in thinking about the campaigns, what's interesting to me is that I think our last president was appealing to people who thought that anyone who benefited in any way from government other than that meant that they would lose something in turn, whereas I think Joe Biden is looking at it from the pie can expand for everybody. And so I think for us here in the city, there's actually some lessons there, because I think what we have to do is, we've talked a lot about it, but one of the things one of the themes that ran through a lot of our discussions at the retreat on Saturday, and I know we're going to be reporting out on it at the next council meeting, I believe, but one of the themes that ran through so much of that was we needed, the mayor talked about this a lot and others did as well, we need navigators or connectors or ambassadors. I think as one of my other colleagues just mentioned, finding ways to expand our outreach throughout the city so that there is an ever expanding pie, to use that metaphor, so that there isn't a sense that the benefit for one person takes something away from someone else. I hope we'll move forward in that sense. I also appreciate the work that the police did in helping to ensure that our community would be safe when there was this violence that happened at the Capitol, and there was the threat of violence potentially after the 6th. And fortunately, we got through everything yesterday without any further problems. I'm not sure I would share what one of my colleagues said about it being a peaceful transition, because it kind of wasn't, because we had 25,000 National Guard and the event at the Capitol, but at least the day was peaceful, and we can look forward to that continuing. And the only thing I'll say is it's not as if all the negativity and the conflict that led up to January 6th and that maybe we're starting to move away from as a result of the inauguration is gone now. So we still have to be, I think, vigilant and cautious and aware of what's happening and report things to the police that may concern us. But I'm hopeful that we'll see a general decline in the level of rancor that we've seen, and hope that that is true at all levels of government. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar, I have a couple of things. One on vaccines. Actually, Councilman Costick, I was on a call, the county call that the WC manager and I are on every other Thursday. We got an update, and I can share some information that was shared on that. But I agree with you, we could probably put up some links on our city website. What was shared with us was that the county gets their delivery of vaccines on Tuesdays. And usually by the end of the day, Wednesday, they have been all distributed. They have over a 99% distribution. So they're getting them in, they're getting them out. The problem is we are not getting enough vaccines. And I just sent to the city council and the city manager and the deputy city manager a message from the county executive. And this was loud and clear on the town hall that was held by the county council this week. There's been a lot of analysis done on the fact that Montgomery County is not getting its fair share of vaccines. So that's one of the main things that we talked about on the call today. As of Monday, we're wrapping up the 1A, which are the the firefighters, the police officers, the public safety folks. That was the first group. And on Monday, the county plans to start moving into vaccines for people 75 and older. They are looking to do this in an equitable way, and not just everybody who has computers and can sign up and get all the appointments. They didn't actually say how they're going to do that, but Dr. Gales did acknowledge that they are looking at ways to do that. I think some of the things that we could put up on the website is that there is a sign up that you can get text or email alerts, and you can pre-register for appointments. So when they come available, and I know actually Councilman Searcy, I was helping some residents in Hampshire Towers get signed up. And so we can probably put the link to that information on our city website. But I've already started receiving, I signed up for it about a week and a half ago, and I've been getting emails and text messages regarding that. So just to give you an update on that. The other thing, one of the things that I've been pushing for the county to do is have a better understanding of, for apartment buildings, ventilation systems. And we were able to get the county to put out information on their website, but it's kind of hard to understand if you are just a layperson. I had to have it all explained to me. And so we've been pushing to ask the county to have their health department to hold some webinars with renters and smaller landlords, so that they can understand the recommendations, what to actually put in place, what's needed. And again, on the call today, I was told that there's a date for that coming imminently, and they will share it with us. So they're just finalizing a few things before they release a date for that. And then to follow up on Councilmember Smith, if there is anyone who lives in an apartment building and there is not signage in multiple languages, we need to know, because that is a guideline coming out of the county. Every multifamily building should have signage in the public areas, and it should be in multiple languages. And please contact us if that is not the case, and we can help get information. And I will I talked to Grace Wiggins, who I know it might be time to do another round of conference calls. We had done that in the spring and over the summer with some of the apartment buildings talking about that. But as we all know, this is, as we talked about before, gone on a bit longer than we had all thought. So we may have to start that again. And then I think the last thing, just to echo Councilmember Siemens' remarks about Martin, it is a huge loss to our community. I can tell you, even in the last few months, his advocacy on behalf of people he lived with and in the community during COVID, he didn't stop. He just kept, pushing and making sure people had the resources they need and the signage and other things. And so, it's a great loss for our community. And thank you, Councilmember Siemens, for your words.
Mayor?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that yesterday, Wednesday, the county opened up sign up for 65 and over. So I got on my computer at 15 minutes before the sign up started and stayed very active to make sure that I got my wife and I registered for our vaccine. We were unsuccessful because it filled up so fast. Anybody without a computer didn't have a chance for it. So I look forward to the county, getting more vaccines for us. Thank you.
Yes, and as soon as we know more about their plans on how they plan on signing people up that don't have access to computers and other things, I think is going to be really important as well. And also just to let folks know that in the when they do open it up for the 1C category, that does include, and they're clarifying government, so elected officials, as well as people who work in local government and what was the word for continuity of government functions. So they're going to provide better definition of what that means, was also covered on the call today.
That was the category that they opened for registration yesterday, was the 1C.
Yeah.
And like I say, it was booked up immediately.
Yeah.
And that's multiple sites. I went to all the sites that the county had listed on their webpage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's it. I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments by council members. I also want to issue my comments and thank yous to our police department in particular for the work that they've done over the last 2 weeks. They had put in really long hours. One of the things that I really appreciated was their collaboration with other jurisdictions about security during this time. And that was, there was remarkable commitment to doing that, but it wasn't always easy. So I just give them a big shout out for the work that was done. We did get quite a few thank yous from some of the people in Tacoma Park that we were helping protect, as well as some of the folks at the various sites. I also like the fact that we weren't as obvious perhaps as it could have been, but we were out there and it was nice to see. I wanted to give a special shout out to one of our Tacoma Park officers, Officer Christopher Woody. He is a relatively new officer. I remember talking with him at length at a Tacoma Park Folk Festival one time when we had a lunch break, and a delightful person. But last March, he was called up for his service in the Army National Guard. And as we went into the pandemic, he served in Maryland, helping with testing site protection and food distribution in Maryland. Then he was deployed to Kosovo. We were anticipating him back to work on January 4th, but just before then, he got called to serve at the U.S. Capitol and at the National Guard. So he's deployed there for several weeks. Just a good person, really appreciate his service to our country and to our state. We're hoping to get him back back in Tacoma Park very soon. But I just wanted to highlight that he's one of our good officers that's doing a lot besides work in the police department. A number of questions raised about vaccine information. Certainly the Montgomery County vaccine website has a lot of information. We will keep working on trying to get the right information out to people, make it as easy to get information on our website to get to those. The information changes every day, and it's really a tough one. So I hope we are able to get just a greater number of vaccine doses here so that we can catch up with the need. Very concerned about the rate of COVID-19 right now. And, so this is a bit of a race against time. And so we're looking out for Tacoma Park and trying to get those connections as quickly as possible. We still are doing the Wednesday and Saturday COVID-19 testing at the rec center. Please go to the Montgomery County website first before going over there, just to make sure that they are operating. We try to keep up with that, but that's the best place to look. And tomorrow we'll have a free flu clinic in Tacoma Park. And that will be with CCI Health and Wellness Services at the rec center from 3 to 6 p.m. And it's a first come, first serve opportunity. So if you need a flu shot, we have that information. I did include some information in my city manager comments about Martin Gottschalk. Good person, just a loss. And all the people that I don't know who have passed in Tacoma Park, which is, several dozen at this point. Martin was a really good person. And when I heard about his loss today, it just hurts. And I know that the other residents of the Maple View have really lost a champion. So we're thinking of him and his friends and family and those who have depended on him all this time. That's all I have for you today. I did want to mention that we provided a lot of COVID-19 information at the retreat, so I don't have a special presentation on that this evening.
Thank you. The retreat seems like a long time ago.
Can I just jump in and say that the various presentations, including the one you just referred to from the retreat, are now posted on the agenda page for that. And I would urge residents who are interested in any of the priority topics that the city council works on to take a look at the presentation associated with that, because there was a lot of really good information shared on Saturday. And I had in my notes to thank you for getting that posted.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, on to our voting items. The first one is a first reading ordinance code amendments to police employees retirement plan, the deferred retirement option program, and the credit for military service. We had a work session on this last week, and there were a couple of questions and more information that was provided. So I don't know if am I turning over to the city manager or our HR director?
Probably me. I think I can speak, but Tracy Smith is available to answer questions. I did annotate the cover page to note that city staff who are not police officers are in the Maryland State Retirement System, which has a military credit of up to 5 years. So the only group of city staff who do not have access to a military credit are police officers who've been hired since 2001. And so the discussions with our police union and our police staff was to have a retirement benefit for those officers who've worked for the city of Tacoma Park for 25 years. If they have served in the military before they started with Tacoma Park, they could get up to 3 years credit, which is similar to the old police system, retirement system that older employees or longer term employees have. And so this was a discussion we had with the union. it's a relatively low cost benefit from the city's perspective, but it is an important part of a benefit plan for our employees. The deferred retirement option program, there's no changed information on that before you. That's one that I think the officers have sometimes more interest in, simply because it allows a lump sum payment at the time of retirement. Does not cost the city more money, but it does allow for some flexibility for officers who are newly retired. I will just note that there was some discussion about, are there other kinds of benefits or approaches that we can take in looking at the police retirement plan. And one of the points is that there may be some other kinds of benefits that might be useful, credit for those who may have served in the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, for example, or identifying other things as we talk with the police and other stakeholders about some other good kinds of things that really keep the kinds of officers with the city of Tacoma Park that we really value. We have wonderful officers. We want to keep them. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if somebody has, if perhaps Councilman Rakostic wants to mention a couple things, because she had raised this issue at the last meeting. There's no change in the language of the code language to be adopted. It still provides for the drop and the military credit.
And Councilman Kostick, if you want, I could share my screen if we want to look at the some additions.
Sure. I wasn't clear. I know we discussed a couple of potential additional whereas clauses. I'm not sure if those are things that we are considering this evening, or Ms. Ludlow, I know you had suggested that it might be necessary to just wait on checking on some things until the second reading ordinance. So I don't know.
So I think that there's I got a quick answer from our Labor Council that this seemed okay. This language seemed okay. I mean, it isn't changing the code language, which is the critical piece. If there were some tweaking that would need to be done, there is a second reading next week. But I think that this is more stating some background information and intent that we continue to look at the right ways to provide benefits to our officers and staff. And that's essentially what this information provides.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Mayor, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, that would be great. I just had raised some questions at our last meeting about the military credit. And, my concern was not with current officers who have a military background at all. I feel like for the most part, we have and I appreciate the information that the chief has shared. We have a system in place for screening potential officers, and the focus has been on officers who do not have that sort of the sort of warrior mentality that I was concerned about it potentially encouraging. And it was very, very helpful to me to get a better understanding of the overall benefits that the city has for other city staff, and that this is not just something specific to police, but that this is something that would be standardizing that benefit across all employees. So one of the whereas clauses that is proposed here, added to the resolution, would just clarify that aspect. And like I said, I really appreciate the information that the chief and city manager shared regarding the screening process. I think that is more of the appropriate place to really consider whether or not someone is going to be a good fit for the police department and what they bring to the city in terms of their perspective and approach. And then this last whereas clause just sort of reiterates our wishes to attract and retain officers who are promoting the goals and priorities of a council resolution. I think that's a typo there. I think it's 2017.
We're not there yet.
Yes. who are reflective of the diversity of Tacoma Park and uphold the many goals and priorities of the resolution that was passed a couple of years ago, with a real focus on community policing and the guardian mentality rather than a warrior mentality. So just proposing adding those whereas clauses to kind of reiterate and emphasize that. And I think it would be useful to consider, as the city manager mentioned, whether there are other types of credit for other national service, such as AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, or other service that might be appropriate as well. So I understand it doesn't look like we'll be able to do that during this particular resolution, but in the future, I think it would make sense to look into that and see about offering that as well.
Great. And we do have, I think this is an addition from section 4.
That's right.
Yeah, that specifically outlines and directs the city manager to look at Peace Corps and AmeriCorps.
Thank you.
Oh, all right. So those are the, again, it doesn't change the actual code or what we discussed last week. I think it clarifies some things. Just going to do a shout out to a fellow mayor in Wisconsin for the idea of Peace Corps and AmeriCorps. As Councilwoman Kostick and I were discussing this last week. And given it's very close to where Councilwoman Kostick was from, I thought it was very fitting. So I see a couple of hands up. Councilmember Kovar.
Yes, thank you. And I just had one question for the city manager. I know that the drop program, the way it was designed, you had mentioned previously, was revenue neutral. And it did indicate that the police, that the military credit would have a modest cost. Will that lead to the necessity to, or potentially to increase the contribution into the police pension when we do that as part of the budget?
There's a potential for a small increase. I actually don't think it will be computed that way. I think the major fiscal element has more to do with that there's a kind of what is the overall pension liability, and that doesn't actually have a real cost to it. It's just that as they're figuring out the CAFR every year, they have to identify that difference, that there's a certain amount of extra liability that's overhead in case a number of people would try to take advantage of something in a year.
But in terms of what our outside actuaries may direct us or recommend to us that we contribute to the fund this year, you don't think it has a huge effect?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
And I mean, they looked at it and they did not see anything significant.
Good. That was my only question. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. The question of adding the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, do we have any data on whether or not that people that have served in those organizations, are they primarily Black, brown? How does that meet our goals of diversity or equity?
So I don't know that. That's part of what we would want to look at, because one of the things that's I know is particularly important to us is many of our Black and brown officers do have a military background. Mm-hmm. Now, part of the discussions that we would want to have is, what is it that gets us, and right now we have a very reflective race background in the police department, very comparable to our city as a community. So the racial diversity of our police department is very good. We want to maintain that. So I think it's entirely appropriate to look at if there's anything that makes a difference about which benefits might be available. In general, I don't think there would be a problem with saying that there's more benefits out there. It really is more our selection process when we hire.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Searcy, did you have your hand up? You're on mute.
Are you coming?
All right. I double mute myself. So I kind of want to pick up where Councilmember Smith left off, because I think he is definitely raising an important point. So one of the things that is important to keep in mind is that our military, specifically not at the officer level, but the lower level ranks, is very diverse. There's data that is showing that about between 40 to 50% of new recruits are actually people of color in the military. So except for Coast Guard, they're different. So, you know, when we are talking about trying to prioritize bringing in people that are reflective, there's also a lot of Black women who are enlisting in the Army. So making sure that the type of individuals that we want that reflect the diversity of our city are incentivized to stay here. So I think that's really important. There is some evidence about Peace Corps volunteers, predominantly women, but only about 34% of the volunteers were minorities. So again, there's some mix, but it's not as much. And then when you look at AmeriCorps, those numbers go down more. I do think, though, that it is important for us to also think about whether or not these programs are incentivized for the Maryland State Pension Fund. So are we creating something that's different for officers that's not available to other city staff? If we think that people from these programs, which often perhaps are not in the space of public safety, they often are doing other types of service programs, especially as we are rethinking public safety in the city, as we're trying to bring in social service and other types of things into the police department. That might open the door to these particular programs, kind of creating a pathway to officers that would be more aligned with what they do in terms of Peace Corps and AmeriCorps. But those are a couple of things that immediately came to mind for me. I'm not saying that I'm against the programs. I'm just saying that we want to make sure that we're not inadvertently doing the opposite of what we're setting out to do, which is trying to make sure that we're incentivizing or creating a package that would encourage people of color or people who reflect this city to come here, stay here. And so I think that's something that's important for us to keep in mind. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Any other comments or questions? All right. So are people okay with if I ask for a motion to move the ordinance as amended, as we talked about? Would someone like to move it as amended?
So moved.
Councilman Costick moved, Councilmember Seaman second. Any other debate, amendments? Okay, seeing none, will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala.
Yes.
Councilmember Costick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yep. Okay, next we have resolution ratifying collective bargaining agreement with ASME. I don't believe there's any changes to this since we had the work session on it last week. So I'll ask someone if they'd like to move the resolution. Councilman DeBala, do I have a second? Councilman Searcy, your box is lit up. Was that a second or a?
No, I'm trying to find my stuff, but I can second it.
All right, you're seconding it. All right, I got Councilman DeBala and then Councilman Searcy. Any questions, comments on the resolution ratifying collective bargaining agreement with ASME? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the vote.
Councilmember Kovar. Councilmember DeBala.
Yes.
Councilmember Costick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Next, we have resolution regarding wage adjustments for staff members not otherwise addressed. This also does not have any change from our work session. Would someone like to move this resolution? Councilman Searcy, do I have a second? Councilman Costick, any comments or questions, amendments? Seeing none, will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala.
Yes.
Councilmember Costick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Okay, next we have our consent agenda. Please remember that we pulled from the consent agenda the single reading ordinance authorizing purchase of 4 replacement police vehicles. So we have 3 items in our consent agenda. Would someone like to move the consent agenda? Councilman Searcy, do I have a second? Second on the consent, Councilmember Siemens. Since there's single reading ordinances in the consent agenda, I'll ask the clerk to call the vote on the consent agenda.
Okay, Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala.
Yes.
Councilmember Costick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Next, we have the single reading ordinance authorizing purchase of 4 replacement police vehicles. Councilman Costick had asked this to be pulled, and I think, is the police chief with us this evening?
No, I'm answering his questions.
Good. Okay. Well, I was going to say, actually, I hope I want the answers to the questions, but I hope he is home, not with us, given the last couple of weeks.
It's been tough, yeah.
Yeah. So do we want to just jump in and provide the additional information that there's been a lot of questions asked?
There's been a lot of questions asked, and I think there's 2 things. One is that we did have a little bit of confusing information because we were working from 2 different background spreadsheets about what we used to have. And so I just want to apologize for not having really clear information when we first presented this. So we're asking to replace 4 vehicles. We originally had 5 vehicles to be replaced. We removed one of them last year from that list, knowing that we were trying to be very cautious about money, especially coming into the pandemic, and what our needs were. So we have 4 gas-fueled SUVs to be replaced with hybrid SUVs. The cars that are being replaced have fairly high mileage, all in about the 100,000 mile level. Many of them have had several accidents or have other high maintenance costs related to those individual vehicles. And so there's a data-driven process that our vehicle replacement team uses to evaluate the year of the car, the mileage, how the costs of maintenance are for each vehicle to see if there's some trends with a particular problem vehicle. The person that I don't think many of you have met is our vehicle maintenance supervisor. And so we're hoping to have a presentation, Mayor, in coming weeks about our whole vehicle replacement process and hear from him and others about what that process is and how we evaluate the various vehicles. So we very much need to have these cars available for police safety. We're running out of cars and it's one of those times when we need to do that. I know there were some questions raised about also things like, would there be electric vehicles coming down the pike that we could wait for? We really don't have that time to wait for them. We would love to have all electric vehicles. And so we're looking for patrol rated electric vehicles. I would even love to have representatives from some of the car companies speak with us about what they do and how they prepare for those patrol rated electric vehicles. We will probably be needing another 7 to 8 vehicles in the coming year. So there will be a lot of opportunity to evaluate how you want to go forward with vehicles and perhaps take advantage of some of the changes in fueling, which I do hope take place in the coming months. The other question that always gets raised is, can we change colors? Can we do different kinds of things? We are able to change colors. There are stock colors for police cars. And so the dark gray cars that we have right now are one of the stock colors. We wouldn't want to go to a non-stock color because that costs more. The decals tend to be the thing that make the real difference between if it's a more friendly looking vehicle versus one that looks perhaps more militaristic or scary. Major changes were made several years ago, actually at the mayor's instigation, to have those, the decals change significantly. And our police chief does not allow heavily tinted windows, which I think is the biggest change, frankly, for the cars. I think there was one other point I was going to make about the cars. But the decals that we have are for dark gray cars. So if we would switch cars, we would need different decals, and that's part of the process. The only other thing that I think we're concerned about is the cost of cars increasing dramatically, because we're writing a contract from 2020 that has, and we're trying to take advantage of the previous car costs as opposed to ones that are potentially significantly higher. So that's another reason of the timing. Are there particular questions that anyone might have?
I think Councilwoman Dabala had her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Although you may have covered some of this. To repeat, because I might have missed it. So the 4 vehicles that are being replaced are now currently they are all SUVs.
That's correct.
Okay, just to make sure. And I noticed also that there's opportunities in the very near future in the capital improvement budget to replace patrol rated vehicles with electric patrol vehicles, should we be so lucky as to see Ford and Tesla put them into production in August, which I hope. I did want to say, repeat what you said. So the city staff has checked it out, the police department, the sustainability manager. I've run some checks on it, and there is no information that any of us can come up with about precisely when patrol rated vehicles that are all electric will be on the market. I continue to get people sending me from all over the country articles about electric vehicles that different police departments have purchased. Every one that I've looked at has been either a retrofitted model like the one in Hyattsville, custom, if you will, or a vehicle that's a police vehicle, but not used for patrol and pursuit, like the one I got today from, I want to say Michigan.
And Councilmember DeBella, we have all electric vehicles in the police department, just not as patrol cars. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So, and the reason I'm making such a big deal out of this is because it is a big deal and we really want to do it, which leads me to saying that perhaps a briefing on the vehicle replacement policy and process is a good idea. One idea that I had discussed with a couple of folks is the notion of spelling out in the policy, which already addresses greenhouse gas emissions generally. But so we don't have to go through this every single time we buy a vehicle, spelling out what we're looking for in terms of electric vehicles and hybrids in the policy. So I'll just put that out as an idea. And with that, I'm prepared to go with this at this time. Thank you.
Councilman Kostick.
Thank you, and thank you for all the details. I know I sent and had a number of questions over the past week or so, and I appreciate all the details on this. I also agree with Councilmember Dabala that just having a presentation and a discussion about what the vehicle replacement policy is and what the committee looks at. And I think also, since the council is taking a vote on this sort of thing, having kind of a more standardized layout maybe of what is reported to us in terms of mileage and other upcoming replacements that are coming in the future and the total number of vehicles, and just to sort of contextualize it. Sometimes it feels like we are getting the request, but we don't sort of have the broader view of what's happening. And I know for me, it was helpful to see that there's a need for another 7 to 8 vehicles, as you said, in the future, because that kind of gives a sense of where we are right now. And the fact that if we put this off, we're going to be down an additional, 11 to 12 vehicles a year from now as well. So that's helpful. And I think, just kind of getting into some of those details can be helpful for us and for residents who have questions about this. So thank you, I appreciate it. And I've heard from residents who, were interested in pushing this back a bit. And I understand that perspective that we are kind of in this kind of time when we're wanting to save money and we have questions about what exactly the recommendations of the task force will be and other things. But it does sound like this is a necessary purchase at this time. And we'll have some opportunity if we want to make changes to things, to colors or other things in the future. We'll have some additional purchases that we'll be considering in the future. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other? Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. This reminds me of history again. We went through, when Chief Rakucci first came to the city, we went through the process of changing our uniforms and our vehicles. And at that time, they went to the all black uniform and the dark cars, the dark gray cars that we now have been using since then. I look forward to the day where we go through that again. I think that with the reimagining public safety task force, as they do their work, I would expect that they're going to be coming out with many suggestions for public safety. Some of those will be directly related to the police department. And although they may not think about colors and of vehicles or uniforms, I can see that things may change. That would seem to me to be the right time to be talking about those kind of things, not right now, while we're in the middle or just beginning to get the task force going. So I support moving ahead with this purchase now, and we'll worry about colors and vehicles hopefully within our lifetime here on this council, but not at this time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. And I haven't been around as long as you have, but when I saw this item, I was like, here we go again. And I do think we have made some improvements over the years, and we can do even better in the future. But given the information that we've been provided and the delay that has been made on this purchase, and that I also support us moving forward at this time and making sure that we continue to question and think about each of these purchases and how we can continue to do better. And so I thank the city staff and particularly the police chief and others in the department who have answered our questions this past week and a half. I know that this originally came before the council. I think we delayed it 1.5 years ago.
In a long time.
It's, so this was something, and I think the city manager mentioned this, but I'll just reiterate again. Originally, we were looking at purchasing 5 vehicles, and what understanding, I think our police department and all of our city staff truly do understand the crisis we are facing right now.
That's right.
And when they come to us for an ask, they're thinking very carefully about what is truly needed right now. And I very much appreciate that. And I do think that's reflected in what is being asked of us tonight. And so I think those are all the questions and hands I see up. So I will ask the city clerk to call the vote.
Was it moved?
Oh, did
Yeah, I
we?
think it wasn't moved yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we did that already. I'm getting confused. Okay, so we need to move it. Who wants to move it? Councilmember Siemens, do I have a second? Somebody? You can't second it. Councilmember Siemens.
I second. I'm turning my camera on.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman
I
Sears.
needed to stand up. I was losing the feeling in my lower body.
That's all right. You can keep your camera off. We got you down on the record. It's seconding. All right. Now, will the clerk please call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala.
Yes.
Councilmember Costick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
I
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Okay, that is our voting session tonight. And now we will turn it over to Roz Grinsby to talk to us about the proposed ZTA 20-07 that Councilmember Costick, nope, not you. County Councilmember Will Jawando has put forward. And I know this afternoon, a number of us have gotten a number of emails about this. And I would like to just clarify a couple of things. We are not voting tonight. This is a work session, and I had requested that the city staff particularly look into the ZTA, because when it was first introduced by Councilmember Jawando a few months ago, my first reading of it, my first question was, how could this impact the city? And particularly, how does this interact with the historic district? And I think that was the first question I asked Ms. Grinsby to look into, which she did. And so given that this is a ZTA that the county council is looking at, given that as a city council and particularly as the mayor, I try very hard to keep track of what goes on at the county council. We are not always informed by the county council when they introduce things. So I don't think any of us, knew this was necessarily being introduced. And so I think it's really important that we stay on top of it. Because we are taking, working very hard on housing issues in the city, and this would impact housing. I wanted to schedule a work session on this. We are not voting on this. We asked the city staff to look into it. We scheduled a work session so we could discuss it. And so I felt like there's a lot of emails that went out, and I thank people for the concerns that they have raised. I think a number of them are things that we've asked. I know I have seen Councilmember Jawando present on this, and he is very open to feedback and to hear about changes that may need to be made to the ZTA. So just wanted to kind of set the stage for that. And so
Mayor, if I might also set the stage and then turn it over for the details to Roz. Thank you. So Mayor, it's helpful to reinforce that there's not a vote in front of the council. And in fact, what we found with county council bills is they often change quite a bit by the time the council really weighs in on them. So there may be a number of changes that happen. One of the things that was asked of me was, is there a city staff position on this bill? And so the recommendation is to discuss this by the council, and just recognizing that there's that the elements that the city council have gone on record in the past, housing and economic development strategic plan, the climate change resolution, the race equity focus, all have some impact on this. And so in general, the general idea of the ZTA is consistent with those positions of the council. Now, how it actually works in Tacoma Park is something that, you know, we would want to learn more about, and it's something that could change. I will also say that I've seen some of the emails saying, you know, we need to do a major study of this. I will say we do not have staff capacity to do a major study, but the county planning departments and others are doing those studies right now, and we have not yet seen what they've come up with. So it's helpful to get, I think, an overview today, and then we will get more information over time, and then the council can determine if it wants to take a position. So with that, Roz, why don't I have you describe what the bill is and some of the background information?
Sure, thank you. So the bill is part of a package of things that County Council Member Will Juanda put forward in December entitled More Housing for More People. And the zoning text amendment is intended to allow increased density in R60 zones. Those are zones that are for single family home residents within 1 mile of a metro station. So I'd like to share my screen with your indulgence, Mayor Stewart, to just show the map of what this looks like. As you can tell, most of the impacted area, 1 mile from the metro station in Tacoma Park, is in the historic district. And so hence the mayor's first question about how does this impact the historic district? The idea is that the new zoning text amendment would allow duplexes, townhouses, and apartments in R60 zones. Duplexes and townhouses are already allowed in R60 zones as a limited or conditional use. And so that is not a significant departure. Apartment buildings already exist in our historic district in R60. I think they predate the existing zoning code. And so we know what that looks like. There's one on Tulip near the intersection of Tulip and Carroll. That's part of the neighborhood. It's important to note that there are a couple goals that are the focus of this work. The idea of increasing density near metro stations is rooted in the idea that the better amenities people have ready access to for public transit, the more likely they are to use them. And as council has discussed in the context of the sustainability plan, we recognize that transportation costs, especially commuting, contribute significantly to the carbon emissions in the city. So allowing greater residential density near a metro station, as we've seen in research in other areas, increases the use of that public transit infrastructure. So that's the biggest piece driving this goal. It's important to note that the zoning text amendment does not remove or supplant any of the existing protections in place for the historic district. The idea that dramatic changes could happen to the historic district by virtue of the zoning text amendment is a misunderstanding. The existing process of going through a historic area work permit application that's reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission would still be in place. That doesn't change. What does change is the capacity for different building types and the numbers of units that might exist in those buildings. So in the same footprint as an existing house or an existing house with an addition that currently serves a single family, the building could be used to serve more than that. It's different than the accessory dwelling unit legislation that was passed by the county a year or so ago in Tacoma Park, in the county actually, in the county legislation of ADUs.
a property is limited to one significant building on it and a smaller unit that could be an accessory dwelling unit. It has to be owner occupied, and so it can only have one rental unit. That already is allowed in the historic district, and it's allowed throughout the county now in R60 zones. So that isn't a change, and it isn't a change. It isn't changed by this zoning text amendment. This zoning text amendment is intended to expand the types of housing that can happen in a single family home zone. So it's a very specific focus with a particular bill. As Council Member Jawanda himself has said, he is listening carefully to the questions that are being raised. He is willing to consider strengthening and clarifying the language on what this means for the historic district. But the idea of what 1 mile from the station looks like, this map is an approximation. So it may be that the lines are, splitting properties or something. We don't have that level of detail from the county yet. As the city manager mentioned, the county planning staff and the county historic preservation staff is putting together their reviews now and their reports on what they perceive to be the impact of the zoning text amendment as proposed. We are waiting for that, and we will see how that overlays with what we understand to be the impact in Takoma Park. The council memo, cover memo, includes some of the priorities council has already identified. I wanted to add one more from the housing. Oh, can you see this? You may not be able to see this. I'm sorry. I will stop sharing. One more from the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan. And as you recall, the plan was divided into 3 categories: preserving, producing, and protecting our residential housing stock and our businesses. And under producing, we specifically call out Objective 2, encourage the construction of new, moderate, and higher density infill residential, commercial, and mixed-use development and redevelopment. And that is what this plan is proposing to do. It's proposing to increase the possibility of density in a single family home zone through infill development or redevelopment. I think it's important to call out, which is also in your cover memo, the race equity considerations in all the work that we do. And we recognize that housing is expensive in Takoma Park, and that housing near the metro is more expensive than other housing. So the limitation of the type of housing that can happen in that area in the R60 single family homes tends to increase the price of housing anyway. So one of the intents of the zoning text amendment is that by diversifying the type of housing stock and by allowing for increased density, it allows for more housing availability and may in fact open up the possibility for a more diverse economic community to live and have easy access to one of the main amenities of Takoma Park in terms of the metro station. I will leave it there. I'm open to questions. I wasn't sure of how much detail you would like to hear about setbacks and footprints, but I'll stop there and let you take the discussion.
Great, thank you. And I will just note that there is materials on the city website with our agenda that provides more information. And in addition, just to underscore what Ms. Grinsby said, that the planning board is hearing public comments on this, and we'll discuss it, and then it will go to the county council for discussion, and likely to have a lot of discussion. I've already been told that sign up for the county council meeting is already full. So for public comments on it. So I imagine there's going to be a lot of public comments and likely changes to it. So I just thought tonight would be a good night to introduce it to council to see if, in addition to some of the questions we already had, if there were other ones that we wanted to raise that maybe we could have answered tonight, or we could submit to the county council member or to the planning department for more information. So I see lots of hands. Councilwoman DeBala.
Thanks. I'll be brief. I'm intrigued about whether this is, I think this has a lot of potential to be a good thing for Tacoma Park if structured carefully. That said, a couple questions about process, couple of questions about what this actually is. It isn't. So when is the planning board meeting? When do we expect to see a county planning board, county planning staff report that would help inform us more and the residents of Tacoma Park more? If the city were to make comments, when would about timeframe, when would those be? So first set of questions about process, and then a couple questions about the actual proposal. So process, what do we know?
My understanding is county staff has been putting together their internal first draft report. I think the deadline was last week. So I expect we would see that probably in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I will circulate the dates for the planning hearing and council hearing, so you have that in front of you.
Great, thank you. 2 questions about process. About the substance of the proposal. When I first read it, I missed the definition of apartment multifamily. So can you give a little more specifics about what is and isn't multifamily under this proposal? That's 1. 2, just say a little bit about the difference between conditional use, limited uses, as you say, that are allowed now, versus the change that this might be to allowing them more generally. Just sort of what does that mean for people who don't understand it? And third and last question, giving an example, in my neighborhood, there's a what some people refer to as a tear down of a single family home, down to the studs and the foundation, and a rebuilding of a several story single family home. So can you just briefly address the notion of redeveloping a property that already has something on it? Because already that happens around here quite a bit. So those 3 questions. Thank you.
Yes, the easiest thing might be to share my screen again. We attached the bill for, let's see, is it going to show up here? We attached the bill in the council packet, so you can see the level of detail. I hope this is large enough to see easily. So in the existing code, in R60, for instance, here we go, a single unit living, that's a single family home, is permitted. 2-unit living, which we would think of as a duplex, is limited. That means there are criteria specified in the code that have to be met before that would be allowed. But more importantly, it means that there's a different process at the county. So the significant language used in the zoning text amendment is standard development as to optional development. Optional development goes through a planning board process. Standard development means it's what we would think of as by right. And so if you want to build a single family home in an R60, you don't need to go to the planning board. You have to meet the requirements of setback, on front and sides. You have to have a certain lot size and a certain percent of coverage, is limited. There aren't any other requirements. If you meet those requirements, you can move forward on it. For a duplex or a townhouse, there are other requirements specified in the code. And, but the process is different. It's optional method. So it goes back through the planning board. In the zoning text amendment, those would go forward. The significant piece that's missing then in that is that there isn't a public hearing where neighbors get to weigh in or have a voice in front of the planning board to talk about what happens. And there are different elements that are different trade-offs in this. One is that if we actually do want to look at increasing housing in a very tight housing market and in a county with a shortage of housing, then a more straightforward, more predictable, and perhaps a more streamlined process is more likely to get us there. The more hoops to jump through, the more difficult it is. But more importantly, the introduction of more uncertainty. So you think you're going to be able to do something, and then the argument at the planning board might go a different way, and you may or may not be able to do what you want to do. And so I think for many developers, that's a deterrent to consider.
Roz, if I might just interject.
Yeah, I didn't quite follow that. Go ahead.
I just wanted to interject for a moment that when the region and COG have talked about getting more affordable housing available in the region, the taking out of a lengthy public hearing review process has been an element that is tied to much more expensive housing, simply because of that uncertainty in the length of time. So that's not necessarily what Will Jawando is trying to get to in this review, but I do want to note that that's been something that every time there's a housing affordability discussion, they bring up the process of review of most projects right now adds significant cost to those projects.
So to make a long story short, single family unit, it's proposed, it's by right, you build it, you're done. If you meet what's spelled out. Limited means there's more standards, but not necessarily a public hearing process. Is that basically right?
If you want to do something that's a conditional or limited use, you go through the planning board.
You do go through the planning board. Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I think there's some confusion about whether these are fast-tracked somehow or whether there's the process with the planning board and the review.
It's so I should specify it might be the hearing examiner. You go through a process that's separate from being able to do it by right currently.
Mm-hmm.
So they go through the housing examiner who says, okay, yes, you do meet these criteria. And there is public hearing at that stage as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Multifamily size and redevelopment of existing properties.
And I should add the bill, which was attached to the council, the proposed bill, which was attached to the council agenda item, includes the definitions that you'd asked about, Councilmember Dabala, about the different housing types. The last question you asked was about tear downs and redevelopment. And that may be a bigger question than tonight's topic. The county does, so I'm not familiar with the specifics that you mention of your situation, but the county does allow redevelopment, and there is a provision that means if a certain portion of the original house remains or original building, it is not considered new development. It's considered a renovation. And so that has impacts for development fees and processes as well. I don't know if that addresses what you're asking.
Well, I think it does. My understanding was that in redevelopment now already there's a provision if some part of the footprint or the house is still standing, that we already have that, is my point. For single family, it's not like it's something new just because we're adding a couple of different uses in the mix into the zone. That was my question. I think you answered it.
Okay.
And on multifamily units and size, I guess I've read it, but I wanted you to say for everyone who's listening that building a 60-foot tall, 10-story building is not part of the party here.
Yes.
That there still are lot size, the lot and other requirements for the single family home would apply, as I read it. This is my question. They would apply to duplex, multifamily unit, townhome, the same existing sets of standards, setbacks.
Yes, that's right.
all that. Height.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm done. I'm sorry.
There are no changes in the allowed height. So in a single family zone in R60, the highest point of the roof is 35 feet. That doesn't change under the zoning text amendment. There are no changes in the setback from the street or from the side yards. There is a change in the lot coverage amount. So for an infill lot currently, a new building can cover 20 to 30% of the lot size. There's no change for the within 1 mile radius. There's a proposed increased density within a half a mile of a metro station to a 35% lot coverage.
Okay.
The only other changes that I wanted to note are a reduction in required parking. So currently for a single family home, duplexes, townhouses, there are 2 off-street parking spots required. Doesn't change for single family, but it would be reduced to 1 for a duplex or a townhouse. And then the apartment numbers are on a per unit basis, and they are also reduced in this proposal.
Thank you. I didn't mean to get into such detail, but I've had these questions from people, and I think it's good for everybody to hear the same set of info. Thanks for your explanations.
Councilmember Smith?
Ms. Crisby, thank you for the presentation. I sat in on Councilmember Jawando's briefing on this, and I don't really understand why would a developer use this proposed change in zoning. What is the incentive for this? I mean, it's not from an economic standpoint, because it is my understanding that there are thousands of approved residential units that just have not been built because the economics aren't there. So what makes this different? And is there any type of incentive that the county is providing, like dollars or something, that would make a developer say, yes, I'm going to spend a whole bunch of money trying to assemble lots or whatever to build these projects? Another question I have is, does this apply to Purple Line stations? I guess that's a no. This is only metro stations. So I guess that's my biggest question: is why would this make any difference, and how does this change the number of affordable housing units in the county when there's been a number of developments in downtown Silver Spring, and I don't think any of those are affordable. And I guess my last question is, what's the incentive for home ownership, condos? Is there any carve out to make developers build small 4-unit condos in this zoning change amendment?
Well, Councilmember Smith, I think you put your finger right on some of the questions that are being asked across the county as people review this. The question about incentives is really important. And as far as I know, there's some rumbling discussion, but this ZTA, as we have seen it, does not include anything about incentives to incentivize development. It's a really critical question because what we know about smart growth is that we would rather see infill development where the infrastructure and amenities already exist than taking more farms and fields and forests to build houses. And that's been happening at a rapid pace. So we want to shift that and look at how to at least perhaps make the process clearer and more straightforward to allow for it. But you're right, this is step one, and there are a lot of unknown questions. The question about why is this restricted to the metro station and not within a mile radius of the Purple Line stations is also a really essential one, and I have heard it raised in other areas in the county as well. My expectation is there may be some amendments to the bill, or it may be that they put in some markers for when Purple Line stations open. There's some threshold or trigger that would allow that to allow some adaptation of the single family zoning near Purple Line stations to also kick in. But as of now, that is not part of the ZTA. And the third question about carving out home ownership or some kind of condominium incentive is also not part of the ZTA. I think Councilmember Jawando's approach was one piece of addressing the housing shortage and extreme high prices is just about quantity. So if we can do something to increase the availability of a wider range of units at a wider range of price points, that's one tool in the toolbox to address it. But the questions you've raised are really essential.
And I mean, it's a question of density. I mean, these are like, the proposal that I saw, the pictures and everything. And I know this is still in a development mode, but I mean, those buildings are so small. I mean, I have a ton of garden style apartments in Ward 5. They're affordable primarily because Tacoma Park has rent stabilization. I don't see why, if you built something similar to that, to the buildings I have in Chevy Chase or Somerset, why that would be all of a sudden affordable. I mean, it's just a 4-unit building on a block that might have a number of McMansions on it. But that doesn't mean that if you own that building, you're going to charge below rent. You're going to charge whatever you can get in Somerset or Chevy Chase. So, I mean, those are just my comments. I mean, it's interesting, but I don't know how it is going to create a bunch of new units that people are actually going to build. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Roz Grigsby, for the presentation. When the mayor and I first were talking about this, we learned of it last week, I think it was, and I think we both had the initial reaction, and when we talked about it with each other, it was, among other things, what would be the impact within the historic district, and were there ways that potentially it could be adjusted, at least from my point of view, to take those things into account. And I look at the map, and I realize that the map was a rough estimate of the mile arc from the the metro, but it's most of Ward 1 and not that much of other wards, and it's most of the historic districts. So the reality is that's what we're talking about right now. If it were to change and include other transit sites, potentially like the Purple Line, then that would have a broader effect, obviously. I think people know that I've fought a lot for trying to expand what we're doing in the community for affordable housing and pushed for a number of the provisions that were referenced in the strategic plan. And I appreciated Seth Grimes's comments earlier. I know he's a careful observer of this set of issues. When I sent out my blog on the city council meeting this week, a couple of days ago, I specifically asked folks to let me know what they thought, residents in Ward 1 to let me know what they thought. And they have. I've heard a lot. I've heard from a lot of people. That's a wide range of views. Some people who live in the historic district support doing something like this. Others who live in the historic district don't. Others are trying to get more information about it. My own view is that there's a lot more we need to understand, because I've heard that from people that it will have a minimal impact in the historic district. And if it has a minimal impact in the historic district, that means it probably won't produce much housing there. I've heard others say, no, it's going to have a really big impact. And so I think there's more for us to understand there. I was on one, I'm not sure if Councilmember Jawando did more than one call, and I'm not sure if I was on the same one that Councilmember Smith mentioned, but I was on a call that he did recently. And, it's in the early stages. There was a lot of uncertainty. There were questions that hadn't been fully answered yet. And there were two county planning staff on there, and they made it clear that they hadn't looked at it yet. And at least one of them seemed somewhat skeptical, and the other seemed like he might be more supportive. I'm not really sure. So I think we should discuss this. I'm happy to discuss anything, but I don't think we're anywhere near, in my view, having reached a point where we would be ready to take a position. And in terms of the affordability question that Councilmember Smith mentioned, I think that is an important question. If you look, for example, at the project we're doing on Garland Avenue, and now I know that's not within a mile of the metro, but that's going to be essentially the type of unit that we're talking about here. And it's going to have 3 units. And the only way that's being made affordable and is going to end up costing below the median housing cost here in the city is because Habitat for Humanity and the city are working together in a collaborative way to, in effect, subsidize it. And I've heard of other cases, and I think that Councilmember Smith mentioned it, townhouses over in Silver Spring, and they're selling for $800,000. And so on my street, which is a block or so away from the metro, and there's at least one empty lot, more or less. I mean, I can imagine if a duplex was put there, it would be extremely expensive because the houses on either side of it at this point cost over $1 million. And so I'm not sure that we get to the affordability in the same way that maybe we do with the ADUs. And so I have a series of questions. I don't expect them all to get answered now, so I'll just run through them quickly, and then we can try to get answers to them going forward. So one is really understanding the impact in the historic district and what that would mean. And among other things, I think that this discussion from Ms. Grigsby was that if this change is made, then there's no longer the requirement for the more time-consuming hearing, but it would still have to go through the Historic Preservation Commission. So I assume there would still be some public process and a process at which members of the public could submit testimony. So I want to make sure I'm right about that. In terms of the ADU law, which was mentioned earlier, the accessory dwelling unit law, I'm just curious what the impact has been so far. Has there been a big uptake of that here in the city, including in the historic district? On parking now, with the ADU law, my recollection is, and maybe we can check on this and get back to us later, but we had asked for, and I think this was included in the end, that municipalities close to metros have some ability to deviate from the parking requirements that otherwise would be required. And I think to me that would be a big deal, because let's say you built a small apartment building, and then you'd have to have, if it was 4 or 6 or 8 units, and then you'd have all that impervious space for the parking. So I'd like to understand about stormwater and also potential tree loss. And I don't have a clear sense for the distinction between the mile away and the half mile away. And I appreciate Ms. Green, we talked about that, but maybe understand that better. Another issue that came up in the discussion with Will Jawanda was infrastructure, related infrastructure, which means schools and other things. And so normally when you construct housing, you know, the need of potential children who would have to attend school is part of it, and understanding how that works. And then, you know, what would happen with property values, I could imagine it could go in a couple of different directions depending on how it's done. If there's several large costly duplexes, that might not, that could cause property values to increase, and again, might not be that affordable. So for me, there's a lot more that we need to understand before we get there. I'm just going to say, I personally think it's fine to say that it's consistent in some ways with our housing plan. I think it's a little premature to say that we recommend that we support it, because the it isn't even, it seems like it's going to be amended, and the supporters of it, and that includes, you know, Tacoma for All, are asking for amendments to it. So I'd like us just to do more to get all these answers, to understand what the impact would really be, and then be in a position to make a decision. And, you know, I think some people like the idea of larger homes, some people won't. I think if you look at my house, for example, and take into account the 35% eligibility or allowance, given the lot size, you're talking about potentially doubling the footprint of my house if we wanted to have that. So the impact on trees and stormwater is big. And again, we do want to find ways to promote affordable housing, but I think we need to think through all these other components. So I'd like to try to get a better understanding of all those things before our next discussion about this. And Roz, I don't mean to say you can't comment on any of those things, but I think some of those require some research and some analysis. So I just meant that I wasn't expecting you to be able to rapid fire answer them all right now.
And I also didn't mean to set up this work session as Ms. Grinsby, you had to be the defender or answer all the questions on the CPA. This was literally to understand and raise probably more questions than we had answers for, and to have a conversation about it. So
I agree with that. And
I don't want to have you feel like you're on the spot to that.
I'm not expecting all those things to be answered now. Those are just the points that I think need to be taken into account.
If I may, though, there are a couple I'd like to just clarify right away to maybe ease people's anxiety. The first is about the public process in the historic district. So yes, the existing process would continue, and it would be through a historic area work permit to do any exterior renovations, demolition, anything like that. It goes through the Historic Preservation Commission with a public process. So that would remain as it is now. And just quickly on a couple others, the stormwater and trees are in the city's purview of permitting. And so we have control over those, and nothing about the ZTA would impact, would change how we do that.
Okay.
Great.
One last question, actually. Would the Historic Preservation Commission, do they even do this? Do they give their views on a policy change like this, as opposed to just responding to specific applications for projects?
I know that the Historic Preservation staff is working on a review of the potential impact of the ZTA. I'm sure that goes to the commission. I don't know if that comes in the form of a resolution from the commission to the council.
But at some point, do you think we'll hear from the HP, from the Historic Preservation Commission, as to what they, as a body, might think about this, or will there be written staff recommendations that we could see?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Great, thank you. Councilman Searcy.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Grisby, for your presentation. I have a couple of quick questions, and I want to make sure that I'm not repeating what my colleagues have brought up. One of the things that has come to mind for me as while reading the ZTA, as well as Will Jawando's Bill 5220, so in my mind, it seems like these things are designed to kind of go hand in hand with one another, right? So you have the ZTA that's designed to allow for increased density in the duplex kind of approach to infill development near metro stations. And then you have the 5220, which is basically requiring at a county level what we already have to some degree, which is the rent stabilization, right? So it seems like to some degree that's kind of how maybe he's envisioning some of these things working together. So I do think that, while we're talking about aspects of, what would be the incentives, I think part of the challenge is going to be the affordability would only come if there's an incentive to increase the density and then rent it out. So I think that's the piece that may also be challenging as well. One thing that was brought up, and I know Councilmember Smith asked why the ZTA didn't include the purple line. And one of the things that has come to mind for me, and Ms. Grisby, you definitely will know better than I do, is, many of the purple line stops in Montgomery County are already in very densely zoned areas, right? So like for, the Crossroads, we're already in like skyscraper territory, in terms of the density allotment there. And so I'm wondering if part of it was, you may not need the ZTA for the purple line stations because there were already a bunch of rezoning that was happening for some of those locations that were already slated for the purple line, if that makes sense. So I don't know if you've heard anything to that effect about why the purple line may not be included as a part of the ZTA, but it is included as part of Jawando's 5220 about the affordability piece.
Right. Yeah, you're right. A lot of the purple line stops are in more densely populated areas of the county already. Not exclusively, of course, so there may still be some advantage to looking at the R60 zones, or there may be some conversation about including other like R40, as Mr. Grimes had mentioned. I think also that I'm not sure when Councilmember Jawando wrote this, but given the disruption in the purple line over the last 6-8 months, it may be that there was just some caution about not wanting to put something out there on the stations without a sense of the timing of when the purple line is going to be operational. So I expect that to continue to be part of the conversation. I don't have a prediction on where it will land.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. And I think my colleagues asked all of the other questions about height and how much space and that really nice table at the end. So thank you so much for sticking it out and walking us through this. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Councilman Kostick.
Thank you. The advantage of going late is that all the questions have already been asked. But I do just want to, and I'm sorry if I missed this earlier, but I do just want to find out, does this change anything for existing homes that people might want to divide into multiple units? Is that something that's not allowed now, but would be allowed under this? Like maybe without any exterior changes significantly, but sort of interior shifting to make them into multiple units?
Yes, currently it is not allowed. The only option for that in Montgomery County now is through the accessory dwelling units. So you can have your primary unit, you can have a smaller unit either within the footprint or as a detached structure. And it has to be owner occupied. You have to live in the primary unit and you can rent the accessory dwelling unit. That's the structure now in place in an R60 zone. And so this would allow more options.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. I agree with the points that Councilmember Smith raised with regard to there not being sort of an economic incentive for developers to come in and build some more multifamily buildings in these spaces in many cases, and that I think that's a missing part that would need to be developed to really make this effective. At the same time, I think it is, and it seems to me it's a useful step in the right direction in terms of emphasizing the potential for greater, my brain's not working anymore, greater density within some of the neighborhoods that are closer to transit. And I don't think, it's not perfect in terms of incentivizing truly affordable housing, but I think multifamily buildings in locations where there are currently only single family homes being allowed are by nature going to be more affordable as individual units. So I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's a good step in the right direction. And I see a lot of potential in it and the direction that it's going. So I do think it's something that we should look at supporting and recommending some modifications to make it something that would best serve Takoma Park and our goals here. And I would be curious to know more about including the Purple Line as well, or broadening out, whether it's not the Purple Line, but maybe broadening out to the entirety of Takoma Park like we did with the previous resolution that we weighed in on. And also, I guess I still have some questions with regard to the historic review process, and I think that's probably not something we can solve within this this conversation tonight. But I do wonder how many of these buildings would actually get through that process. And I know there are people who are concerned on the opposite level that historic group, that this would just sort of open things up. But I, to some extent, have the opposite concern that this won't actually allow for much change because of that review process. So I think it's good, moving in the right direction. I'd like to see a couple tweaks, but I like the idea of encouraging more density, and especially in these areas close to transit where people can walk and bike to transit and get to their jobs and other places using transit.
Thank you. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Ms. Grisby, for being here tonight at this hour and for the presentation. I just have a few questions to try to make sure I understand what the proposal is. But I'd first just like to say that I think for many years, we've known that higher density residential near the transit hubs is important from an environmental perspective, and also for use of the transportation and for decreasing some of the traffic in the area. But we also realized for years that there's a lot of, not in my neighborhood, it's a great idea, but not here. So I think this is going to be interesting to see how this goes. First of all, I'd just like to understand if someone owned a property within this area near the, within the mile or whatever it is of the metro, this change would basically be giving them some additional rights over what they have. So that for the setbacks and the density and number of units, but that there still would be a public process not just with the historic preservation, but also with the tree commission, I'm sure, and they would have to notify neighbors of what their plans were before those plans are completely approved. Is that true?
So the short answer, as I understand it, is that it depends. If someone owned a vacant lot in an R60 zone and they wanted to build a single family house and it met the setback and height requirements, they can go forward and do it. They don't have to inform their neighbors. They don't have to discuss it with anyone except Montgomery County Department of Permitting Services, and of course with the city regarding trees and stormwater and city right-of-way, those kinds of
So we
things.
have about one property that is a undeveloped property in Tacoma Park. So let's talk about if they have something
Right.
else.
Right. So if someone wanted to redevelop, if someone owns a house in an R60 zone and they want to do an addition, if they're in the historic district, then they go through the Historic Preservation Commission and there's a public process. If they're not in the historic district and they meet the requirements, again, they meet the county's requirements, they can do an addition. They could build a garage. They could do an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, without talking to their neighbors about it. If they need something else, for instance, subdivision, you'll remember the property at the corner of Jackson and Ethan Allen, or
Right.
recently the property on Ethan Allen, the Pipestem property at 415 Ethan Allen. The subdivision process requires the public process. So they go through the planning board for that. But if they fit all the existing requirements now, they can go ahead and get their permits from Department of Permitting Services and the city. So the new plan proposes that if they fit the requirements, they could build a single family house or a duplex or a townhouse or an apartment building if they still fit within all these requirements of height, setback, percent of the lot coverage.
Even if they chose to tear down that beautiful Victorian mansion?
No, not in the historic district. If they have a beautiful Victorian mansion and for some unimaginable reason it is not designated in the historic district, then I don't know. I guess that's a question for what happened there. If they're in the historic district, then they go through the historic process. And so that is a very clearly defined process, and it has public input. It requires notification of neighbors as part of the application process. It goes through the Historic Preservation Commission. There's a opportunity for public comments.
Okay. And then one last question, and that is, if a person lived within that same area that's covered by this proposal, and they were perfectly happy with their current zoning, and they just wanted to leave their home the same way as it is, there's nothing that says that they have to change it, and there's not going to be any changing of their current zoning.
You are right. There is nothing that forces a property owner to do anything differently right now. If they sell, the new owner can choose to live happily within the house just as it is, or they can choose to make changes. But there is nothing in the code that pushes greater density on folks in their existing homes.
I thank you for your time.
Okay. Hi. All right. I don't see any other hands. I think all the questions I have we have been raised already. I think it was Councilman Kostick who talked about what looks like the plan here and what the intent of the ZTA. I think is something that we have talked about as a council. It's has been pointed out, many things that we've been discussing in our housing and strategic plan talks about, moving in this type of direction. So we know that we have a lot of questions. This is going to go through a pretty intensive review process, this ZTA, and our goal tonight was to, at least my goal tonight was basically to level set so that the council understood what was being proposed, so that as it starts to move through the county process and we think about ways in which we may weigh in or ask questions, that we were prepared. That we knew what the ZTA was. We already had raised our questions so that we were not scrambling in February or if this starts to move. So tonight was, the first step. I thank my colleagues for the questions they raised. And I think then the next thing is that we will have more information as it goes through additional reviews. And Ms. Grinsby, I know that you have a lot on your plate, but I hope as this moves through, you can keep the council informed at different points. And maybe we can pull together some of these questions that we can pass on to the county council member, Jawando, for his consideration. I know he's been answering a lot of questions, so I would imagine he may already have some answers to these already prepared. And in addition, I think it was Councilman Searcy, though it's getting late and I'm forgetting who said what, that talked about the fact that Councilmember Jawando did propose the two bills. I think he's calling it the anti-rent gouger, or what we would call rent stabilization in Tacoma Park, and this bill at the same time, because he does see them working hand in hand and together. And so we didn't discuss rent stabilization because that wouldn't necessarily pertain to us because we already have rent stabilization in the city. So we just focused on the ZTA for tonight. So if my colleagues are okay with a plan on moving forward on us monitoring this, putting together, asking Ms. Grinsby to pull together the questions that we've raised tonight, and then coming back to this again when we have more information, and it may be appropriate for us to weigh in. Does that sound, do I have a sense of like that's a good plan to move forward? Awesome. Seeing thumbs raised, seeing heads nod. Okay, so that's our plan on this ZTA, and thank you very much, Ms. Grinsby, for pulling together all that information. And our last work session is a budget amendment item that I'm going to turn it over to the city manager to discuss.
Thank you. As I referenced, I guess it was at the, I don't know if it was last meeting or at the retreat, but kind of an overview of some of the financial matters coming before you. This budget amendment would clean up a bunch of accounts, primarily related to the wage resolutions that you approved previously with Local 400 and certain employees, and those that you voted on this evening with Ask Me, and those that weren't covered by other resolutions. So if you go through, a whole lot of these items are simply reducing the amount that was budgeted for wages in different divisions to just a 1.5% increase for this year. And although it's not referenced in total in this budget amendment, because we've had previous budget amendments, the total amount of salary savings from positions not filled and this reduction in the amount to be used for wages totals in about the $550,000 amount. There's also referenced here is the fact that we're not getting as much interest on our bank accounts. There's reference that we have, we've paid off the debt on our Public Works Facility project. And let me get to the right pages. We have some savings from equipment that we're not buying because we've had a pandemic and we've not had people working out. We have some money budgeted for the remaining cost for the facilitation of the Public Safety Task Force. We had set aside some money before this this would cover the rest of the cost of that facilitation. There's some adjustment about money that we thought we would get reimbursed by FEMA for city attorney work on COVID-19 items, and we didn't get reimbursed for. And there's clarification about how the money comes out of the housing fund expenditure for the Garland Avenue project that had been previously approved. So it's cleaning up those accounts. I don't think there's any surprises in this information. There's a couple changes that you should know. There was a typo in this, which said that our general fund balance decreased, but it increases with this budget amendment of $105,356.96. So I did want to clarify that. There will be another budget amendment that will still need to come to you that actually reflects when we get our CARES reimbursement from the county finally, when that money comes through. And then there will be some adjustments that reflect the little bit higher cost of the elections than had been originally budgeted. And when you look at the report that was presented by the Board of Elections, you'll note that there was some increased costs for mailing and for salary and for wages during the time of our election. So those are things that will come in a future budget amendment. They're not here, but just to give you that heads up. Happy to answer any questions that you might have, but it is pretty straightforward, and I had gone over this information before with the council.
Great, Councilmember Kovar.
Yes, thank you for that brief description. I appreciate it. And I just had 3 things I wanted to mention or ask about. Number one, thank you for clarifying that the general fund has a net increase rather than decrease, because that was one of the things that I had sent you in an email, and I'm glad that I understood a little bit more about that than I thought I did, because I thought it should have been an increase. The second thing is, it looked to me, and maybe I just added it wrong, I did a very rough adding up of all those personnel changes, and it didn't come to 550, which you had mentioned was the personnel savings.
Right.
And the 4 separate personnel packages, the 2 union contracts and the 2 non-union resolutions, personnel compensation resolutions we passed. But so all 4 of those are in here, and it does total 550,000.
So some of the budget, a previous budget amendment, I did the police items.
Okay. So that's the reason why it's a little bit less.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, that makes me feel a little bit better. And then the only other thing is, and this isn't for tonight, but you did mention, I'd like to say again, and I don't know where my colleagues are in this and what it would take to do this, but my opinion is that the reimbursements under CARES and potentially under FEMA, if we get those, should go into our COVID fund as opposed to into general reserves. And I would propose that we do that in the next budget amendment when and if that happens and we get those funds. So again, we don't have to decide that today, but I assume that's something that in theory could be done if people agreed. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, I think that there's I think I've heard from council an interest in that. I mean, obviously that would be something for you to consider. I did not put it in here because the major hunk of money has not come to us yet.
Right.
And so I think it would make sense to do that all at one time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilman DeBow.
Yes, thank you very much for all of this. And I have just a couple of quick questions. On the interest and dividend items, the time frame on that is 3 months, 6 months, the estimate for the entire year coming through, or an adjustment for last year that we're reflecting in this year?
It's our guess. It's our guess for this fiscal year.
Okay, so it's
if banks all of a sudden change things and were really nice to us and whatever, this could change back in our favor, but we're using our best judgment that it probably won't change.
Okay, so this would cover best guess on this entire fiscal year. Thank you.
Right.
Salary support services says budget expenditure increase to pay for retirement incentives and payouts. And I thought that in the discussion we had recently that that some of the retirement incentives were revenue neutral. So which ones does this refer to?
This reflects that there's the payout, but when you look over the longer period of time, it will be revenue neutral.
So this
It's
does
just-
refer to the, okay, short-term payout.
That's
long
right.
Balance, okay.
That's right.
And last, just to reiterate, last item, housing fund expenditure, $200,000 for Garland Avenue, which I support. We all voted for it, but that there is an expectation that in a future budget year, that money will come back through the sale of a property.
Yes.
First owner, just.
It may be a while, but yes, that was the way it was written.
Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
I just want to go on the record and say I support Councilmember Kovar's proposal to make sure that any CARES money or FEMA money that we get back will be part of our current COVID-19 fund. And I think it is important that residents know that that is the council's position. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands or questions. So we get on the budget amendment. It'll come back to us next week.
Okay, it'll be a 2 reading ordinance, so you'll see it 2 more times.
Great. All right. So I think we're done for this evening. And I just want to say we are ending before 11 o'clock. Last week it was what, 10:30, this week before 11. I'm trying very hard to not pack our agenda to get us to bed before 11. So anyway, thank you everyone very much, and looking forward to seeing you all again to talk about the city manager search and our agenda next week. So have a good next couple of days, and thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate
good
getting out
night.
early.
Thanks.